The Saint, Theodosius of the Caucasus. The Confessor Miracle Worker. Publication details. Center for Hagiological Studies. Saint Simeon the Translator, Saint Theodosius of the Caucasus. The Confessor and Miracle Worker, published by the Center for Genuine Orthodox Mission. Saint Ekaterine, Strongili Koropi, Attica translation of Russian texts. Elder Antonia Sidneva and Sofia Ligaki. Text compilation. Elder Antonia Sidneva, corrections. Athena Nicolapoulou and Aglaya Dimsa, philologists. Text and edition editing. Elder Marku, central distribution. Holy Monastery of St. Catherine, Strogili, P.O. Box 54 194 00 Corpi. Tel 210 6020 176. Front cover, icon of St. Theodosius of the Caucasus, work of Elder Antonia Sidneva. Blessing of the Metropolitan of Mesogaia and Lavriotica, Mr. Kirikos. St. Theodosius of Minvodi in the Caucasus is one of the greatest spiritual figures of the martyred Russian Church of the Catacombs, but also of 20th century Orthodoxy in general. Absconded from the womb, in the words of the Apostle Paul, in the work of saving souls, a miracle worker from his early teens, since he performed his first miracle by the grace of God at the age of just 14. A minister of the Holy Sepulchre for decades, exiled and imprisoned in the terrible Solovki camp, for Christ's sake, a prophet and healer of the physical and spiritual sufferings of the people, he distinguished himself primarily as the confessor of true orthodoxy in Soviet Russia. And his mere presence constituted a check for the Sovietized Surgeonist Patriarchate of Moscow, which, after his death, proceeded to remove and seize his precious relics, presenting him as a member of its pseudo-church, in order to disorient the catacomb faithful and gradually bring them under its jurisdiction. The grace of God has often merited the writer to venerate the tomb of St. Theodosius in Minvodi, Caucasus, as Bishop of the Shepherds under the jurisdiction of the True Orthodox Church of Greece, community of the Russian Church of the Catacombs. And I consider it a special blessing to offer to my humility his epitrachelion and breadth, which he had entrusted to a nun, his spiritual daughter, with the order to give them to the Orthodox Greek Metropolitan, who would celebrate the Trisagion on his tomb. These relics are reverently kept in our Episcopal Church of St. Catherine in Strongili Koropi. Blessing the publication of the handwritten work of Venerable Elder Antonia Sidneva, we invoke the rich blessing of God through the intercessions of St. Theodosius and all the saints. Amen. A fervent prayer to the Lord, the Herald of Mesogaia and Lavriotica. Diocese of St. Catherine, July 26, 2006. Memory of Venerable Paraskeve, Ermolau, and Theodosius the Wonder Worker. Forewords, St. Theodosius. To the faithful of the Catacombs. From the Greeks, we received the Apostolic Succession, or, we will take it back from them. The pen of Venerable Elder Antonia Sidneva, graduate in economics from the University of Voronezh, Russia, and hagiographer, offers the holy-loving, Greek-speaking reading public the life of a many unknown saint of the 20th century, the miracle worker Theodosius of Jerusalem, of Minvodi in the Caucasus, 1948. For St. Theodosius, the writer has published 3 articles in the official press of the Holy Metropolis of Mesogaia and Lavriotica of the True Orthodox Church of Greece. The magazine, Orthodox Breath of Forth, in the special 2002 diary of the same metropolis, where there is dedication to the Russian Church of the Catacombs, while the 2006 diary was also dedicated to him. The text of Elder Antonia is distinguished by its simple and unpretentious style. It is a graceful text. The information concerning the saint comes either from Russian texts that are already in circulation, or from people who knew him during his life or were blessed by him after his death. They are valid testimonies of reliable witnesses, eyewitnesses, or those who witnessed it. It is a testimony of the soul of ordinary people, addressed to ordinary people of the people. Despite the above, the manuscript text cannot be characterized as a popular religious reading, devoid of hagiological validity. The information it contains is of great historical importance and fully outlines, down to the smallest detail, both the person and the environment and the conditions in which he lived and died. In this work we find the original popular piety of pre-revolutionary Holy Russia that led Theodore, still a child, to abandon his family and take refuge on Mount Athos in the Russian monastery of St. Panteleimon. His asceticism in the monastery, his spiritual progress, the wickedness of his fellow monks, which even went as far as attempting to assassinate him, but also the wealth of God's grace that allowed the 14-year-old teenager to work miracles. His elevation to the priestly ministry in the abbot's office, his ministry for decades at the Holy Sepulchre, hence his Jerusalemite name, his return to Russia at the will of the Virgin Mary, and the practice of a hermit hesychast life there, accompanied by a few dedicated women during the first decade of the Russian Revolution. his arrest and exile in 1927, to the terrible Solovki camp on the White Sea, a hellish former monastery, where thousands of believers of all ranks were held and martyred, mainly, after 1927, members of the Church of the Catacombs. There, the Blessed Theodosius was restrained and conspired with eponymous, such as the hieromartyr Bishop Maxim of Serpukhov, 1931, and anonymous confessors of true orthodoxy, so that after his release, in 1932, he could settle in Minvodi as a solace for Christ, covering his activity as a cleric of the catacombs under the cloak of feigned foolishness. The ministry of the wandering Russian people through his prophetic and healing charisma, his supernatural divine appearances, his extraordinary miracles, his miraculous, like Salo, actions, his oral teaching, and his exemplary life in Christ. His holy death and miraculous funeral burial by heavenly visitors. His posthumous frankness before God, which since then has been manifested daily in the miraculous healings of those who come with faith to his gracious tomb and his honorable relics. And his exploitation by the Moscow Patriarchate, an ecclesiastical structure which the saint never recognized as an exponent of the true Orthodox faith and church, and which, however, presents him as one of its own, in order to control, disorient, trap, and absorb the catacomb faithful. A similar case is that of Saint Matrona of the Moscow Monastery. In the life of Saint Theodosius there is a detail of great historical and ecclesiological importance. His spiritual children often asked him about the future of the Church in Soviet Russia, mainly as it concerned the lack of truly Orthodox bishops and clergy. It is characteristic that the persecutions of both the atheistic authorities and the Patriarchate against the catacombs had so greatly reduced their number that the faithful wondered who would bury the saint when he fell asleep. To this question, Saint Theodosius replied that, "We received the apostolic succession from the Greeks, and from them we will receive it again." And in order to make the verification of his prophecy more concrete, he entrusted his epitrachelion and breadbox to a nun, his spiritual daughter, with the order that they be given to the Orthodox Greek metropolitan who would perform the trisagion at his grave. In 1996, His Eminence Metropolitan Mr. A. Preacher visiting the area was informed by believers that a cleric of the catacombs was buried in Minvodi, and expressed the desire to celebrate the trisagion at his grave. Thus, without knowing the command, the relics of Saint Theodosius arrived as if in his hands. The prediction of Saint Theodosius was fully verified, because since then His Eminence Metropolitan Kyriakos has indeed transmitted the genuine and uninterrupted apostolic succession to the Russian Orthodox of the catacombs, with the ordination of clergy. The presence in Greece of personal objects of Saint Theodosius, his epitrachelion and artophorion in the Holy Episcopal Church of Saint Catherine of Strogaile in Koropi, part of a garment and a vestment in the chapel of Saint Zina of Russia in Mandra, is a special blessing for the Greek Orthodox, and an even greater blessing will be the erection of a church in his honor and the spread of his memory, to which the present work of Elder Antonia will certainly contribute. Another seraphim, you have shown yourself to your people. Father Theodosius, intercede for those who honor you. Anthony Marco, Center for Hagiological Studies. Saint Simeon the Translator. 2 introductory words about this book. This book was written in honor of Starets Theodosius of the Caucasus, and tells of his life, his miracles, and the help of every kind that he accordingly offers to the faithful. It tells of the life of a truly great confessor, a life that created a legend in the hearts and minds of an entire people. It seems paradoxical how a simple man managed to connect mundane reality with the mystery of the miracle. Those of his spiritual children who are alive today testify as eyewitnesses to what they saw and experienced from the charismatic Starets, grandfather, Theodosius of Jerusalem, whose help did not cease to be offered to the faithful even after his death. Every year, more and more people resort to his grave to worship him. Russians honor him in many and various ways. All those who are unworthy, poor, sick, lonely, find relief and consolation either as pilgrims at his grave or by communicating mentally, calling out to him and asking for his help. In an inexplicable way, Saint Theodosius seems to be connected to Orthodox Greece throughout time. So, reading this book, all Christians wish to receive his blessing. Antonia Sidneva, Elder, Lord, bless. Life of Elder Theodosius, Saint of Jerusalem, Wonderworker of the Caucasus. May 3rd, 1841, July, 26 August, 8, 1948. Childhood years, Hieromonk Theodosius, in the world Theodor Theodorovich Kassin, was born on May 3, 1841, in a village in the Perm province, Urals, into a poor and large family of farmers. His parents, Theodore and Catherine, were very pious people, and in this way they raised their children. When Theodore was born, his mother said, "This young man will become a great priest, because on his head there is a special shape made for a turban." Her words seemed prophetic because his whole life was a journey towards God. Different from all the children of his age, he showed that his soul was full of love for God, and his words were a constant prayer. Near his house there was a forest, where little Theodore went every day to pray. There he found a large stone on which he climbed and prayed for hours. Once, during the hour of prayer, he heard a voice telling him that the name of the stone was Paradise. From then on, Theodore also called it Paradise, or Stone of Paradise. First sign of God. One time, when the whole family was sitting around the table praying before eating, they saw a dove come from the iconostasis and sit on Theodore's shoulder. He stroked it lovingly, while his parents told him not to bother it. After a while, it left again, as it had come from the area of the iconostasis. His journey to Mount Athos. Theodore, even as a child, was called grandfather by everyone, and his mother's prophecy became more and more evident, that he would become a great priest. At a very young age, he passed by a river near his village and saw a small boat full of people on its banks. He got in as quietly as he could, and, without anyone noticing him, he went and hid in a corner of the ship. However, after 2 days, they discovered him and, surprised, began to ask him who he was and where he was going. He declared with courage that he was an orphan and that he wanted to go to Mount Athos. A group of pilgrims who were going to Mount Athos gladly took him with them. Thus, little Theodore arrived at his destination. His life on Mount Athos. When he arrived at Mount Athos, he went to a monastery, at the deposition of the belt of the Theotokos, and begged to be allowed to see the abbot. After he was allowed to do so, he saw the abbot, fell to his knees and begged him to take him to the monastery. "I will pray continually," he said, "and I will do whatever you wish." The abbot was amazed at the way the little boy answered and was interested in knowing whose child he was. When he learned that he was an orphan, he understood that God's providence had led him there and immediately took him to the monastery. There, Theodore grew up, learned letters, and made great progress in spiritual practice. The abbot, seeing his progress and effort, took him in, gave him his own cell, and made him his subordinate. Temptation begins war on Theodore. Theodore's virtues were many, and the wicked man could not stand this. So he tried in many ways to torment the virtuous monk. He instilled envy and jealousy in the souls of his brothers, and they constantly tormented him, sometimes with insults, sometimes with curses, often with beatings, with the aim of destroying him. Despite all this, Theodore remained strong, patiently enduring the various trials and praying to God to forgive his persecutors and to help him, so that the abbot would not learn of his suffering and would want to protect him. He did not want to lose the reward that God grants to those who endure. First miracle of Theodore. At the age of 14, Theodore performed his first miracle. A Russian nobleman and official visited the holy mountain with his demon-possessed wife. He had her on the ship because women were not allowed to set foot on it. However, he had a dream that a young monk who was on the holy mountain would be able to heal her. That is why he decided to make this journey. When he met the abbot, he explained the dream and the reason for asking for his help. The abbot immediately went with all the monks to the ship. The sick woman, when she saw them, understood that none of them were the young man she had seen in her dream. She told them that the one she had seen in her dream was very young. They looked at each other and understood that she was talking about Theodore, who was insignificant to them. Then the abbot sent for him to come to the boat. When he soon approached the boat, the demon, with the voice of an ox, was crying out and saying, "He will drive me out! He will drive me out!" Everyone watched the incident in amazement and wondered how Theodore stood out so much. The abbot asked Theodore, "Tell me, my child, to whom do you pray that your prayer has such power?" And he answered, "To the Golden Virgin Mary." Then the abbot asked him to bring a blessing from the icon he was praying to. However, Theodore first asked him to give him 3 days of time to fast and pray, and then to bring the blessing. When the 3 days had passed, Theodore took the blessing from the icon of the Virgin Mary of Kazan, one of the icons venerated in Russia, and gave it to the abbot to take to the sick woman. Seeing the abbot approaching, she began to cry out, "Where are you driving me? Where are you driving me?" The abbot approached her, sprinkled her, and gave her this holy water to drink. And oh, the miracle! The woman was healed. The official, pleased by the miracle, wanted to offer a lot of money to Theodore. However, he refused to take it and told him that if he wanted, he could give it to the abbot for the needs of the monastery. With humility, he told him that he was a sinner and unworthy and did nothing. The one who performed the miracle is the great physician of souls and bodies, God, for the sake of the Virgin Mary. Therefore, you must thank them. This was Theodore's first miracle. A year later, the officer visited the monastery, bringing many gifts out of gratitude for the healing of his wife. New trials of Theodore. Miracle of the Archangel. After the miracle, many sufferings began for Theodore. Temptation entered the minds and souls of the monks, and they, filled with hatred, tried to destroy Theodore. When the abbot sent him with 2 other monks to a certain city to collect money for the monastery, they found the opportunity to put their plan into practice and destroy the virtuous Theodore, so that he would never return to the holy mountain. They abruptly opened the hatch of a sewer and forcibly pushed him in, certain that this would be the end of his life. Theodore, however, found strength through prayer and begged the Archangel Michael to help him and save him. And lo and behold, the Archangel appeared, lifted him above the foul waters and freed him. He also gave him a scroll with a prayer and told him to read it constantly so that he would always be well and know what to say to the abbot when he asked him what had happened to the other brothers. Theodore thanked the commander-in-chief and left, to return to the city and continue collecting money for the monastery. In the meantime, the other 2 monks had returned to the monastery. When the abbot asked where Theodore was, they told him that he had fallen ill and remained in the city. The abbot was worried about Theodore and was surprised by the monks who had left him sick and fled. In a few days, Theodore returned to the monastery and brought 3 times more money than the other 2 monks had brought, and, turning to the abbot, he said, "Father, forgive me. I was late in returning because I fell ill." He did not tell the truth, but this lie was a salvation, just as the commander-in-chief had told him, who helped him to be saved. That is, he enlightened him to say what the other 2 monks had said, so that the abbot would not find out what had happened. Returning home, Theodore, from a novice, was to become a rhizophore. The moment came when God enlightened the abbot to learn that Theodore was not an orphan, but that his parents were alive, and he sent him to go find them and receive their blessing. Theodore returned to his parents. He arrived in his village, went to his house, knocked on the door, and asked the woman who opened it to him to host him. This woman was his mother, but she did not recognize him. She welcomed him with joy, but she did not stop her work with the rocket. Theodore began to ask her how they lived, what they did, and who was alive or who had died. His mother answered him everything. But when she reached the point where her little Theodore had fallen into the forest, she broke down and burst into tears. Theodore asked her, "Did this child have any mark by which someone could recognize him?" She immediately answered him, "Yes, my child had a mark, a large olive tree behind his right ear." Then Theodore lifted his hair and pointed to it. The woman, seeing the olive tree and looking closely at his face, recognized that this was her beloved son, Theodore. With emotion and joy, she hugged him and kissed him. Theodore stayed at home for a while, close to his parents. However, he had to return to Mount Athos. He received his parents' blessing and the blessing from the icon of Our Lady of Kazan that they gave him, and returned to his monastery full of joy. Ordination of Theodore at the age of 18 in 1859. The abbot, upon his return, believed that he was ready for ordination. He himself performed the sacrament and gave Theodore his new name according to God, which was Theodosius, the work of Theodosius in his various missions. After his ordination, it is unknown exactly how long ago, the monk Theodosius was sent from the monastery of the Holy Belt of the Virgin Mary of the Holy Mountain to the monastery of the same name, Russian, in Constantinople. He remained there for 5 years, constantly serving the Russian pilgrims, according to the need of each one. After the end of this mission, God's providence sent him to Land of Promise, as Jerusalem was called. Tradition says that he remained there for 50 years. He prayed near the tomb of Christ. His desire to acquire knowledge in order to help everyone was great. That is why, as it is said, he spoke 14 languages by the grace of God. He became a pilgrim to all the holy pilgrimages. That is, he walked where the Savior Christ had walked. His contribution was so great that the people gave him the name Grandpa of Jerusalem, or Starets Theodosius of Jerusalem. Many events escape us from his mission to Jerusalem because there are no documents. Tatiana, the submissive. One day, among the many, a mother and her 14-year-old daughter visited him to meet him and receive his blessing. The little girl, however, was so deeply affected that she decided to become a nun, to stay in Jerusalem or wherever else the Starets were, and to help him for the rest of her life. Her name was Tatiana. Mission to the Holy Mountain. At the end of the 19th century, in 1879, the monk Theodosius returned to Mount Athos, where he had first begun his journey towards God. In the monastery of the Holy Belt of the Virgin Mary, the abbot was Ioannikios, of whom Theodosius was also a spiritual child. Ioannikios was there for 45 years. With the abbot's blessing, the monk Theodosius was ordained a priest on December 12, 1897. There are also documents that prove his ordination. Hieromonk Theodosius remained as a subordinate of Ioannikios until his death in 1901. After his death, and in accordance with the Athonite tradition, Hieromonk Theodosius succeeded him as abbot of the monastery. However, because his many responsibilities distracted him from his purely spiritual work, after a short time he returned to Jerusalem, where he became a great monk. It is said that there he was visited by a Russian official and pensioner and urged him to return to Russia, because they needed him more there. Theodosius combined this call with the command that he himself had received from the Virgin Mary to return to Russia, to the village of Platnerovka. Of course, Jerome never confessed this. Theodosius, but after a while, one of his spiritual children, Antonia, spread it on her own initiative. Hieronymus. Theodosius took from Jerusalem some objects of great spiritual value to transport them to Russia. The demons tried in many ways to prevent him from taking them with him, but with the help of God, they did not succeed. Hieronymus Theodosius was also followed to Russia by the nun Tatiana. Returned to Russia. First, Hieronymus Theodosius returned to Russia, to the city of Platnerovka, where he stayed for a whole year. The fame of his return spread quickly, and many people visited him for blessings and spiritual support. Hieronymus. Theodosius, with the same always benevolent disposition, approached the people who visited him. Testimonies state that 500 people visited him daily. These people recognized him as a servant of God and protector of the weak and the suffering. Hieronymus Theodosius, with his prophetic gift, which he never confessed as his own, but always attributed to God, knew the faults of each person, and therefore he rebuked them so that they might correct themselves. With this gift, he managed to cure the illnesses of the soul and body of many people. Until his death, he followed this beneficial tactic and managed to lead many on the path of salvation. God's sign for where to build the temple. In a small crack, by God's providence, a sign appeared for where a church was to be built. There was a stone in it on which Jerome was kneeling. Theodosius prayed for 7 days and nights. There, the Virgin Mary appeared and showed him the place where the church would be built and the space in which the offerings would be prepared. What was the sign? On the stone a flower miraculously grew and bloomed. At first, Hierom. Theodosius, with the help of residents from nearby villages, built a small church and a small space for offerings. In addition, they also built many makeshift cells from sticks and straw. However, these were preserved for a short time, since soon everything was destroyed by the harsh conditions that prevailed. In these buildings, Hierom, Theodosius and the 2 nuns initially remained, as his assistants and spiritual children. In this dry place, through the prayer of Theodosius, healing water gushed forth, and people came there with a greater faith to be freed from whatever afflicted them. However, everyone believed that the living water was Hieronymus Theodosius, who with his word soothed the souls of people. Things we should pay attention to. Among the many who wanted to visit the Jerusalemite were 3 little girls, Anna, 11 years old, Liuba, Agapi, 12 years old, and Anna, 10 years old. They had also learned from their grandmothers about the elder's prophetic ability, that is, that he knew the sins of people, and they asked to take them with them when they went to visit him. However, they did not take them, finding an excuse that it was too far away. When the grandmothers met Elder Theodosius, and he asked them where the little girls were who wanted to visit him so much, they understood that he knew everything through his prophetic ability and asked his forgiveness. Elder Theodosius gave them the following to go to the little girls: 3 pieces of prosphora, 3 pieces of sugar, 3 salty mushrooms, and 3 small cucumbers. You will give them to eat, wherever they are. However, he knew where they were. The grandmothers, arriving in their village, found them in the churchyard, gave them Elder Theodosius's treats, and they ate them. Immediately they felt themselves overflowing with joy, and their longing to meet him in his hermitage grew greater. After all this, the grandmothers decided to go with the children to visit Elder Theodosius. When they arrived, he spoke first to the grandmothers, and then took the little girls separately and said to them, "How I wish I could send you straight to God, just as you are." They stayed for a short time with their grandmothers at the hermitage, even though their desire was to stay there permanently. When they returned home, they began to think about how they would escape, since their parents would prevent them from returning to their grandfather from Jerusalem. That is why they planned everything in secret. On the last night, they apologized to their parents and begged their guardian angel to help them. When everyone fell asleep, they got up and left. The arrival of the children at the monastery and their story. The monastery was very far away, and the fear that nested in their hearts was very great. They walked through the night and worried about what could happen, from an attack by dogs to any kind of unforeseen event. However, they held hands so that one could draw strength from the other. With constant prayer, they asked their angel to help them reach their destination safely. At dawn, they arrived near the monastery, and Hieromonk Theodosius had gone out on the road with the cross in his hand to meet them. In the morning, their parents woke up and looked for them. When they did not find them, filled with anxiety, they went out into the streets, continuing their search. They asked anyone they saw. They expected to learn something from the people guarding the area. However, no one had seen them anywhere. When the grandmothers learned this, they thought that only Elder Theodosius could help their mothers. They then set off to reach the hermitage as quickly as possible. When they arrived, they asked Elder Theodosius to tell them where they could find their children. Hieromonk Theodosius told them, "The children are here. God brought them, but my opinion is that you should leave them in the monastery for the salvation of their souls." However, he did not prevent them from doing what they wanted. 12-year-old Anna. When, after a short time, she left the monastery and arrived at her home with her mother, they found her father ill. However, they all discussed the incident together, and the parents remembered the vow they had made to God to dedicate her to him when she was born, since before Anna all their children had died. So they decided, albeit belatedly, to fulfill their vow and allow Anna to return to the monastery, since she also wanted it very much. 20-year-old Anna. After a while, her repentant mother came to take her from the monastery. Before they left, however, Elder Theodosius gave them an egg from the cobweb and said to them, "Take Peter, he will speak," as happened to the Apostle Peter when he denied Christ. When they arrived home and at some point the egg became a cobweb, the signs of their ordeal began to appear. The chick was a rooster, and they named it Peter. As the rooster grew up, it became a wild rooster and they were forced to slaughter it. When Anna grew up and got married, her husband was a drunkard, violent, and they called him Peter. She lived with him in torment and only escaped from him when he was taken to war and killed there. But her suffering while she lived was great, with her 2 disabled children. 12-year-old Liuba, love. Although her parents were noble and rich and she had everything, they did not pressure her to do anything against her will. And so she remained in the hermitage. She was the one who gained the most for the glory of God and the salvation of her soul. Because she knew how to read and write, she taught the children of the nearby village, as well as other children who came to stay there for a while. Stories worth knowing. The poor mother with her daughter. Among the many visitors who went to meet the Starets, there was also a poor mother with her daughter. When Elder Theodosius saw the little girl, he asked her mother to leave her in the monastery so that she could become the bride of Christ. However, the mother refused, because her daughter was her only helper and looked after her other children when she went on business. Then the Starets gave her a grain of corn and told her to put it on the icons and the family would never go hungry again. So the mother left her little girl at the hermitage of Elder Theodosius, and when she got home, she did exactly what Elder Theodosius told her to do with the corn. One day, a rich landowner came to her house and asked her to go to work. However, she refused and explained to him that she had no one to look after her children. However, he agreed to take the children with her. Thus, a way was found for her family to live comfortably and to have a very good salary. In her entire life, she never faced any need. Her daughter soon fell ill and died, but she had managed to take the form of a nun and depart from this life as the bride of Christ. Anisia's story. Together with her friends, Anisia visited the hermitage of the Jerusalemite to see him and receive his blessing. However, when the time came after their meeting for them to leave, the Starets gave Anisia 3 bags sewn from cloth and told her that they would be filled with her tears. Anisia refused because she had never cried, despite what she had gone through with her evil husband. After the death of her husband, she lived with her 2 sons and 9 grandchildren and was only happy that they were all together and that they loved her. However, after a long time, she experienced a great trial. She lost her entire family to an epidemic and was filled with tears far more than the 3 bags that Elder Theodosius had given her. Later, when she visited Elder Theodosius, kneeling and crying incessantly, she asked him how he knew about the misery she would experience. And Elder Theodosius replied, "God revealed." It was an allegorical phrase that he said so as not to reveal his prophetic gift. Tale of Vasia, wife of the Rostov guardsman. Vasia, the wife of the Rostov guardsman, out of curiosity alone. When she learned about the Jerusalemite, she went with others to meet him. However, she did not believe and said to her fellow travelers, "If the priest is as good as you say, he must perform some miracle so that I too may believe in God." Vasia stood out from all the other women by the clothes and ornaments she wore. However, this did not prevent Elder Theodosius, after blessing them and offering them food, from sending them all, including Vasia, into the forest to cut wood. Vasya stayed with him to help him chop the wood with the axe. However, carelessly, Vasya put her hand near the axe, and Theodosius cut off a finger from her right hand. The starets took the finger from under it and said, "Isn't this your finger a miracle?" He wrapped it in leaves and put it in his pocket. Vasya was frozen with fear and could not say a word. She looked in anguish at the blood flowing from her hand. The starets immediately took her hand and began to pray and ask God the Father to heal her. Then he cut some herbs, took his finger from his pocket, put it in his hand, wrapped it in them, and tied it with a cloth with a wick from the candle that his subordinate had brought. Vasya looked on in disbelief and thought that all these dirty materials, grass, wick, cloth, on her finger could contaminate it and cut off her entire hand. Vasya expected that after all this, Theodosius would send her to rest. However, he only blessed her and sent her to take a shovel and go to the field to work. The next day, after the liturgy, and while everyone had left the church, he called Vasya, untied her hand, and said to her, "Move your finger." She was afraid to even breathe in case it came off. However, it was firmly in place as if nothing had happened. Only at the point of welding there was a mark like a pink ring. Vasya was able to move her finger as before. In this way, God, through his servant Theodosius, brought Vasya to him so that she would believe. After 3 days, Vasya was preparing to leave, but before she could, Elder Theodosius asked her to change her clothes and dress in strange clothes so that she would look like a clown. Elder Theodosius knew why, and that is why he urged her, "Return in these clothes, and in your manner make your husband faithful." When Vasya returned home and saw her, her husband did not recognize her and asked what had happened. She did not seem to be bothered by the clothes she was wearing and told him that she was fine. Her husband believed that Vasya, his wife, had gone mad and called in psychiatrists to examine her. The examinations showed that she was healthy, and therefore her erratic appearance was due to her faith in God. However, her husband could not stand such a change and began to insult her, beat her, and make her life difficult. In the end, he left her and ran away with another woman. Shortly after he left, he fell ill with pneumonia and was hospitalized. Vasya visited him in the hospital and he begged her to take him back home. He welcomed him back into his home, served him with love, and died a Christian, after Vasya helped him repent and believe. Vasya, who was pregnant, gave birth to a little girl, who she raised in the fear of God and became very faithful. Barbara's story from Rostov about awe of the 2 heavenly visitors, the servant of God. Barbara came to the hermitage from Rostov and stayed there for a long time. During her stay at the hermitage, she saw 2 special travelers arrive there and be hosted for 3 days. Elder Theodosius stayed with them in his cell and they talked constantly. Barbara watched them from afar, but she felt that she loved them. And when she saw that the starets was going to go with them to see them off, Barbara asked permission to go too. She received the blessing and followed. On the way, Barbara took out all the money she had and gave it to one of the 2 to buy tickets. He replied, "We are traveling without tickets." However, Barbara insisted so much that she finally took them. As soon as they arrived at the station, the visitors disappeared. Barbara understood that they were not ordinary travelers and pressed the starets to tell her who they were. The one you gave the money to was the prophet Elijah, and the other was James, the brother of God. Elder Theodosius asked her to keep this a secret until his death. Barbara kept her promise. The presence of the Virgin Mary. Catherine of Rostov came to the hermitage and stayed for a long time. One night, while she was performing the duty of a guard, according to the monastery's rules, and while Elder Theodosius was praying on the stone as usual, she suddenly saw that the whole place was illuminated with an extraordinary light, and the surrounding mountains and forests were flooded with the colors of the rainbow. Then a woman of infinite beauty appeared, surrounded by rays of light. She approached Elder Theodosius, stayed with him for a while, and then disappeared. Then, little by little, all the lights went out, and only when the elder moved away from the stone did he himself become a source of light. Catherine, surprised, dared to approach him and ask him who this wonderful presence was. "Promise me that you will not tell anyone anything, and I will tell you. I promise that I will only tell my daughter." Elder Theodosius confessed that it was the Mother of God who visited them. The presence of Elijah and Enoch. A family had a double mission from God and they carried it out. The man and father, by command of the Virgin Mary, went to a monastery and stayed as a monk. The woman and mother with her daughter became travelers of God, pilgrims from monastery to monastery. The mother's name was Maria. After 8 years of continuous travel, they arrived at the hermitage of Elder Theodosius and stayed there. One night, when Mother Maria was assigned to guard the monastery, she saw a bright light that blinded her and she believed it was a fire. However, despite the inspection she made, she found nothing burning. she reached the stone where the starets usually prayed. She saw two shining men talking to him. She was surprised, stood still, and did not understand how long she had been there. When she came to, it had dawned, and Elder Theodosius was beginning the liturgy. After the end of the divine liturgy, Mary approached and asked Elder Theodosius, "Who were those brilliant men I saw at night?" At first he did not want to tell her, but with her persistence he managed to find out after he strictly asked her to promise him that until his death she would not tell anyone. After Mary promised him, he revealed to her that they were the prophets Elijah and Enoch. Mary continued her mission according to God, while her daughter followed a secular life. When the starets died, she visited his grave and begged the other nuns to bury her next to him when she died. And so it happened, even though her daughter was in her last days, because she was staying with her, she hid her clothes so that she would not leave. Maria, however, borrowed clothes from her neighbor. She went to Minvoti, to the tomb of Elder Theodosius. In a few days, her daughter also died. She buried her near the tomb of Elder Theodosius, and so her wish came true. Prediction of a 16-year-old's martyrdom. Before the Feast of the Transfiguration, Elder Theodosius sent his subordinate Anna with other nuns to go to the city and procure the necessities for the monastery and the feast. When they arrived and finished buying supplies, it was already evening. They stayed at a peasant's house and slept in the courtyard of his house. Anna learned from the peasant's daughter that her wish was to come with them to the hermitage. Anna, however, explained to her that she was too young, and the starets would not accept her since he had also refused her sister, who was older, 16 years old. He told her that there was another way for someone to save his soul, such as martyrdom. That is, the one who would have a martyr's death would be considered a martyr of God. While the girls were talking, they saw the front door open and the starets enter the house. After a while, melodious psalms were heard. They also got up and went to pray with him. They knocked on the door, which was closed, and the little girl's father opened it and asked them what they wanted. They replied, "Since the starets came to make a request, we want to participate too." The father, astonished, told them, "No one has come here. Everyone is sleeping." The next morning, Anna left and went to the hermitage. As soon as she arrived, she described to the starets what had happened. He, as usual, replied allegorically that his uncle, although he was blind and lame, managed to go everywhere. After a while, the 16-year-old went on a pilgrimage to the nearby monastery of her village, Temnie Buki. It so happened that the communists, as state power, invaded the monastery and took all the monks, nuns, and the priest prisoner. They also took the 16-year-old girl with them, who could not bear the torture and was taken to the prison in the city of Novorossiysk and died on the way. Thus ended the life of the 16-year-old, and she ascended to heaven as a martyr of Christ, according to the prophecy of Starets Theodosius. Prophecy against the sanctification of the waters. On the day of the Epiphany in 1925, Elder Theodosius blessed the waters. Everyone saw many fish gathering around the point of sanctification. The starets, seeing them, wept bitterly. He prophesied that even though there were many fish, they would eventually scatter and only 4 would remain. The whole world wept with him. Elder Theodosius blessed them with a cross made of oak, inside which was also the holy wood. This cross is preserved to this day by Priest K in the catacombs of Russia. Mercy forgives and erases great sins. In Rostov, there lived a widow named Vera, who had become pregnant before her husband died. Her relatives pressured her to abort the child, since she could one day remarry. The widow finally gave it up. She worked as a saleswoman in a shop in the city and could, with the cards she had, purchase certain things according to her share and send them to the monastery as she wished. She collected the flour little by little, and, filling a sack, which was considered a treasure due to the poverty that prevailed, she sent it with pilgrims to the hermitage of Elder Theodosius. When she saw it, she asked whose it was so that she could pray for him. At first, they did not tell him, because Vera had forbidden them to say it out of shame. But Elder Theodosius insisted, "If you don't tell me the name, take it back." Everyone then shouted how it was from Vera. The same night, Vera saw a nightmare in her sleep. That is, at the bottom of a ravine, there were many babies covered in blood. A demon was holding a piece of paper that also wrote her own sin. However, she also saw Elder Theodosius approaching, grabbing the paper and pulling a baby out of the ravine, and heard him say to her, "Vera, your flower, that is alms, saved your son." After this dream, Vera went to the starets and asked him to forgive her. From then on, she repented and lived a Christian life. Later, she met a good man, Michael, with a high state position, who proposed marriage to her. Vera told him, "If the starets grants us his wish, I will agree." They went together to Elder Theodosius, and after seeing him, he approved of him, blessed them and said to him, "Become a good husband and a faithful Christian. Just give up your state position and become a simple train conductor." At some point he married them and they started a good Christian family. However, no one he knew could understand why he wanted to give up his government job. An incident that occurred later greatly troubled Michael. While he had become a very good conductor and everyone loved him, one day he wanted to visit a friend of his and got off the train. But before reaching the station, he put his co-driver in his place. Unfortunately, due to some mistake, shortly before reaching the end, he collided with a parliamentary carriage. This was considered very serious for Michael and could have been punished with death. Michael, distressed and afraid, wanted to hide to avoid arrest. However, Elder Theodosius told him not to do so, because his punishment would be severe. Michael did not understand why he was telling him this. However, because he believed him, he obeyed. Subsequently, his trial took place in the special court, where a large crowd that had gathered supported him, shouting, "Innocent, innocent, let him go free." And so it was. The decision was a symbolic punishment of confinement for 1 year, and he was immediately set free. The people lifted him up in their arms and carried him out of the hall. When he returned home, he found a letter from Elder Theodosius, which said to him, "God himself was your lawyer in court." He kept this letter for the rest of his life, believing that the power of Elder Theodosius's prayer brought the good result. Trials of Elder Theodosius and Mysterious Return. In March 1927, 2 weeks before Easter, the Starets ordered his nuns to begin preparations for the holiday and the painting of eggs. They wondered why he had asked them to do this so early. On Good Friday, the Starets asked them to bring him what they had prepared so that he could bless them. The nuns again wondered about this order. However, Elder Theodosius explained to them, "I will not be with you on Easter. You go to Minvoti." As soon as he finished his sentence, 3 soldiers entered the monastery and asked him to gather his things and follow them. As soon as Elder Theodosius saw them, he said to them, "I was waiting for you." Before following them, however, he ordered a nun to bring him a basin of warm water to wash their feet. The strange thing was that the soldiers did not react. They even accepted to be hosted. Elder Theodosius, before leaving, blessed them all and told them not to cry. He reminded them that our Christ also suffered such days. "Just pray," he concluded. Then they took him to prison in Novorossiysk, where he remained for a year, until January 1929. Then they sent him to a prison in northern Russia, in Solovki, where other saints were also being held. 4 remained in the hermitage, as he had prophesied during the Feast of the Epiphany. These were 1. Tabitha, Tatiana, nun; 2. Natalia, nun; 3. Lyuba; and 4. Anna, the subordinates. After a while, Lyuba went to the Starets in exile to take care of him. The other 3, at the Starets' command, after taking all the holy objects he had brought from Jerusalem, went to Minvoti. They bought a small house and stayed there, waiting for his release. He was imprisoned for 7 years but was released in 1932. He came to Minvoti and raised his cross for Christ's sake. He was dressed in red with feathered shirts and constantly played with the children, who called him Grandpa Kozuka. All the children loved him and he constantly gave them candy, but they thought he was crazy. He never called them by their real names. Sometimes he called them Cosmas and sometimes Kosmaki. Along the way, it became apparent that those whom he called Cosmas became good people, in contrast to the others. The submissive nuns, Anna and Lyuba, got a job. Tabitha, however, and Natalia were very sick. They all lived close together, praying together and secretly from everyone. All the spiritual children of Elder Theodosius from other cities came to visit him secretly. For the residents of the area, he was Grandpa Kozukas. The intervention of Elder Theodosius that saves a girl from sin. In the same neighborhood as Grandpa Kozukas lived a woman who had just been released from prison. She took her daughter from the orphanage and, because they had no means to live, she was thinking of sending her to the area where the soldiers lived and making her a prostitute. It was evening when she saw the Elder Theodosius, who was called Crazy, passing by the house and throwing bags into the yard. When he opened them, he saw many banknotes of great value. He is crazy and thought about what he wanted to do. Perhaps he messed up the house and accidentally threw the money into our yard. However, because he still had a conscience, in the morning he took the money and gave it to him. "Grandpa, you accidentally threw this money into my yard. Take it back," she said to him. He replied to her, "When the devil puts evil thoughts into someone's mind, God sends my God to prevent him so that he does not lose his soul." The woman was moved by his words and said to him, "I saw you, grandfather, and not your uncle. Take the money. God sent it to you so that your daughter would not fall into sin." Then she realized that he had read her thoughts and knelt down and wept bitterly. She thanked God and the elder, and with his blessing returned to her home. From that moment on, and for the rest of their lives, she lived with her daughter piously. However, everyone was preoccupied with the thought of where the poor grandfather, who often did not even have bread to eat, found so much money and did not keep even a small coin for himself. Small stories with big meaning. Suicide prevention. One night, the elder woke up in anguish and asked Luba to get up quickly and get ready to go to the coal store. Luba was a little late, and he urged her to hurry up so they could catch up. After a while, they arrived at the storehouse, and in front of the door, they saw a young man. The elder approached him and said, "What do you want to do? Don't you think that the devil will take your soul? Don't you think about your wife and your 2 children?" Luba, looking carefully, saw the rope with the noose that he had ready on the door. However, it seemed that the words of Elder Theodosius at the last moment had the power to prevent him from committing suicide. The white sheet. In the yard of another neighbor's house, the elder threw a white sheet. "He's crazy," the neighbor thought, and paid no attention. Unfortunately, however, in the morning they brought her son dead from a work accident. The arrest. One day, the elder entered another neighbor's house and began to sweep it everywhere. The neighbor then went to his subordinate and asked her to look after him because he was crazy. The next day, however, the police car gathered them all from the neighborhood and sent them into exile. This was the interpretation of the sweeping. A dying woman who was healed from the living water. One day, a group of women who had known him before the exile visited the elder. However, one woman was missing because she was very ill and could not accompany them. However, she begged them to ask the starets to pray for her. When the starets saw them, he did not even let them rest, and he ordered them to quickly bring Vera by train, because otherwise she would die and leave her 4 children orphans. They reacted, fearing that he would not be able to bear it and would die on the road. The starets insisted, "Do what I tell you, and she will not die." So they went and brought Vera. The starets immediately made a prayer and then gave her a blessing to drink. At one point, Vera could not drink anymore. However, the starets urged her to continue, no matter how difficult it was. "What you are drinking," he told her, "is life-giving water, and it will take everything unclean out of you." He also gave her a bucket, from which she quickly took out a lot of dirt like tar. From that moment on, within 3 days, she felt completely healthy and returned home happily. From dream to miracle. A pilgrim of St. Theodosius came from Baku and went to the store for shopping. Inside, she heard 2 women talking. One young woman on crutches was telling the other about a dream she had. An old man in a white shirt invited her to go to Minvodi if she wanted to be healed. What could this mean? The woman who had come in for shopping understood who he was talking about and asked her, "If you see him again, can you recognize him?" "Of course, since I have him constantly before my eyes." Then he invited her to go with him to Minvodi and find him. As soon as they arrived, they entered his courtyard, and when she saw him, she realized that it was he who she had seen in her dream. He was waiting for them, holding the cross with the holy wood. As soon as he blessed her, she put down the crutches. The pain stopped, and she felt completely well. She returned home happy. However, since she was a journalist, she obviously wanted some document from her healer. So she took her camera and returned to Minvodi to have a photo of him. As soon as she arrived and saw him cleaning corn, she photographed him, even with his feathered shirt. The photograph exists to this day, and the shirt is kept by a priest in the catacombs of Russia and is considered a shrine. War prediction. A year before the outbreak of World War II, Elder Theodosius had predicted it and had confided it to Alexandra, his spiritual child, who had come to visit him. "There will be a terrible war," he told her, "and many will be killed, since they have forgotten God. The wind of war will scatter them like ashes, but those who seek God's help will have it and be saved." Alexandra asked him if she would be killed. Theodosius said that you will live and come again. Macabre sign. To a female pilgrim from Novorossiysk, shortly before the outbreak of war, Elder Theodosius gave bags of sifted earth and told her to scatter it all over the city. He explained to her that a time would come when the dead would remain unburied and unread. In time, this proved to be the case. In Novorossiysk, besieged by the Germans, the losses during the war were great, and the macabre prediction he had made had now come true. Another sign. One day, Elder Theodosius came with a nun to the grove and began to uproot all the small trees. The nun, astonished, asked him, "Elder, isn't it a shame to cut down these saplings?" He replied, "In a little while, God will cut off from the root the young and strong, but unfaithful." Within 2 months, war broke out. The war begins. children's salvation. When the Germans arrived very close to Minvoti, the bombing had begun on the railway station, which, as a key point, had to be destroyed, and the transportation stopped. There was also a kindergarten near the railway station. One day, the elder visited him. He called the children to him in a charming manner and, as if playing a game, told them to run with him. They began to run after him. The teachers also ran after the children. As soon as they had gone away, the kindergarten was bombed, blown up and completely destroyed. Once again, the intervention of Elder Theodosius proved to be a saving grace. Hospital protection. There was also a hospital near the railway station. Opposite it were 3 wagons full of shells, and bullets. A station worker saw the elder running. In one hand he was holding the cross, and with the other he was trying to push the wagons. The worker wondered how a grandfather could move 3 wagons with such weight. And yet he shook them and could not believe his eyes when he saw the carriages rolling on the rails. As soon as they had moved away, that part of the station was bombed, and the damage done was minor. Can you imagine what would happen to the hospital if the wagons with the explosives were bombed there? The salvation of an entire family. In a family of 5, only one woman worked, Elena. Elena supported her sick sister, her mother, and her 2 sons. Her husband was at war. The food she could buy with her card was not enough for them to support themselves properly. Once, when her son went to buy their food, he lost the card that was valid for the whole month. Elena, thinking that everyone would die of hunger, went crazy because she did not know what to do. The devil saw the opportunity and showed her the solution. The easy way was for the whole family to die, easily and quickly, by drinking poison. When everyone fell asleep, Elena prepared the poison and waited to give it to whoever woke up, and finally to drink it herself. Elena was neither afraid nor sorry for anyone. She was simply annoyed that they were taking so long to wake up. At midnight, someone knocked on her window. Elena went outside and saw a grandfather in a white shirt who said to her, "Take this piece of bread and 3 candies and give it to each member of your family in the name of the Holy Trinity, and your house will never lack bread." When Elena entered the house, she looked at the bread and counted the candies, which were exactly 3 for each person. Her eldest son woke up first and gave him the 3 candies. She explained to him that the one who brought them was a grandfather. "I know Grandpa CAUCASUS, who constantly hands out candies." "Grandpa CAUCASUS told us, Mother, to put a cross around our necks, and our dad will return from the war alive." Thus, Elena's diabolical plan did not come to fruition. The morning she went to the hospital, she recounted the incident she had experienced and asked if anyone knew Grandpa CAUCASUS. Anna, Elder Theodosius' subordinate, who worked as a nurse at the same hospital, told her that she knew him very well, and that they were also neighbors. Elena begged Anna to go meet him. "Let me ask him first," Anna told her, "and then I'll answer you." And so it was. The Starets agreed to visit him, and Anna brought her to him. When the Starets saw Elena, he said to her, "How could you think of killing 4 people? They would go to heaven. But where would your own soul go? Throughout your life only pray, and never in the future will there be a lack of goods in your house. But there will be an abundance, and you will help others too." "Grandpa, there is so much poverty everywhere, and I will have a surplus? Where will I find it?" Elena asked in bewilderment. "God can do all things and has everything." Because the Germans were constantly bombing the railway lines near the hospital, people were afraid and did not come. Then the sick began to call Elena to their villages and homes to help them, and they paid her with products. In this way, she supported her family and even helped others who were hungry. Soon, the war ended and her husband returned. Elena glorified God and Elder Theodosius for everything. The salvation of the unfaithful Alexandra. Alexandra, a not-so-loyal girl, knew the German language well, and out of jealousy, some slandered her as a collaborator with the Germans. This was the reason she was imprisoned, and remained imprisoned for 7 months. Her mother, Antonia, who knew Elder Theodosius, went to him and begged him to pray for her daughter. In prison, Alexandra met a nun who taught her to say simple prayers to the Virgin Mary, such as the Theotokos Virgin and others. One night, when everyone was asleep, Alexandra and the nun were reciting prayers. Suddenly, the door opened, and the Virgin Mary and Elder Theodosius entered, surrounded by so much light that they were dazzled. They blessed them, and Elder Theodosius told her, "Tomorrow you will go home." After that, they disappeared without Alexandra being able to say a word. When she discussed it with the nun, she denied that she had seen anything. The next day, she was indeed released to the glory of our Mother of God and Elder Theodosius, a family of heretics who became Orthodox. Antonia, the spiritual child of Elder Theodosius of Novorossiysk, met a family of heretics who tried to convert her. Antonia, however, struggled to convince them that their faith was not the correct one, and that the Orthodox faith was the true one. The disagreement, however, continued between them for quite some time until they accepted Antonia's invitation to meet the starets in Minvedi, who would tell them what the true faith was. So they all went together to the starets' hermitage. Elder Theodosius met them with the cross in his hand. He blessed only Antonia and gave her to kiss the cross, and this because he had foreseen that the heretics would refuse to kiss it. Then Elder Theodosius addressed the man of the family and asked him, "Do you know God?" "Of course," he replied. "But know," he continued, "that since you do not believe in the cross, you will never see the face of God. You," he said, "were raised by a father and mother, but you abandoned your own child." Then the man understood that Elder Theodosius was not an ordinary man, but had prophetic gift, since he knew what no one else knew except himself. This man, when he was a soldier, had met a girl and had a child with her. However, when his service ended, he secretly left without leaving any trace so that his wife could find him. Later, he married another woman, and no one learned his secret. The man knelt before Elder Theodosius and, repenting of what he had done, begged him to pray for his soul and to guide him to the right faith. And so it was. Elder Theodosius taught him for 3 days. He taught him to believe in Christ and the cross correctly. This teaching took root in his soul, and he lived his entire life piously with his family, the family of Ivan and Natalia. They had a son, Andrew, and they lived in Jungma, a seaside town on the Black Sea. Ivan was orphaned at a very young age, after his parents were killed by the communists, and he grew up in an orphanage. He knew nothing about faith until the time came for his soul to seek God. For this reason, he attended meetings organized by Protestants in a neighboring house, trying to hear and learn something about God. The Protestants insisted that Ivan be rebaptized. However, Ivan's father-in-law dissuaded him from doing so and urged him to seek out the right Orthodox. During this time, they met Antonia from Novorossiysk and expressed their doubts to her. Then she told them that she knew the clairvoyant starets, and that if they wanted to meet him, he would solve all their doubts. When his father-in-law heard this, he gave them his blessing and said to them, "If he is truly an Orthodox priest, let him perform the religious wedding for you." All the way to Minvodi, they neither drank nor ate anything. When they arrived, it was Christmas Eve, 1947, and the starets asked them, "For God's sake, my children?" "Yes, grandfather," they told him. "You need to get closer to God. There is still time." Elder Theodosius took a towel, he called it Adam, from the hanger, embroidered with crosses, wore it like a cloak and said to them, "The time has come to remove Adam from within us." Then he brought a small plate of rice, took a spoon and gave it to Natalia. She was afraid that some of what the holy hands of Elder Theodosius offered her would fall and was slow to take it. As if he had read her thoughts, he told her, "Whatever God gives, take it without fear." She covered her head with the pebble and said emphatically, "May God's blessing from today on always be with you." Natalia still remembers this incident with awe, as well as another one. She saw Elder Theodosius become like a giant, the small roof of his house rising to the sky, and his voice becoming thunderous. Ivan felt very happy when they left the starets' hut. He wanted to embrace the whole world, down to the last blade of grass. Such indescribable joy was felt by everyone who met the starets. Ivan's soul was filled with love for God, and he wanted to transmit it. The next morning they came again, and Ivan wanted to learn about the cross, since the heretics had told him that whoever has a cross commits a great sin. As soon as Elder Theodosius saw them, he said to them, "Our Christ was crucified on the Holy Cross," and continued his teaching about the cross. At that time, no one dared to make his cross in front of others without fear of being imprisoned. It took a lot of courage for someone to dare to do so. He instructed his spiritual children that they should always wear a cross and make the sign of the cross correctly. In addition, he explained to them that the seal of the Holy Spirit that we receive during the sacrament of anointing remains incorruptible until the second coming. And the sign of the cross is a seal of Christ for the faithful and frees them from the bonds of hell, in contrast to the seal of the Antichrist who casts us into hell. He also explained to them what each sign of the cross means. The submissive Lyudmila, after the teaching, told the starets that they, Ivan and Natalia, had not had a religious wedding. The starets blessed them, and instead of wreaths, he wove flowers and crowned them. Thus, the religious wedding took place. "You will have great luck," a nun told them, "since she has crowned very few." On the third day, she blessed them again and told them to bow to a white tablecloth that was on a small table. The starets told them, "God is my witness, when today his angel brings food here." Natalia, when she kissed the tablecloth, realized that a small crumb had stuck to her upper lip. Natalia remembered what Elder Theodosius had told her. "Whatever God gives, take it. so she licked the crumb with her tongue. She felt her mouth fill with some nourishing food of indescribable sweetness, so full that she could neither swallow nor speak. This lasted a few seconds, but the taste remained unchanged. She remembered what she had been told many years ago about the manna from heaven. Their spiritual mother, Antonia, also remembered a similar incident that had happened to her daughter. She had given them a plate of rice and told them to eat until they were full. However, they were thinking, how can someone be full with one spoonful of rice? Antonia let her daughter eat it. However, the starets ordered them both to eat until they were full. It was a miracle that they finally ate and were full, and the rice was not finished. When the starets saw that they were full, he said to them, "Now you are finished," and the rice was finished with one spoon. On the last day, when Ivan's family was ready to leave, they waited for the starets to come out into the courtyard to greet him. When Natalia came out, she asked him to give them his blessing. Natalia would remember his blessing all her life. The starets did not even approach or touch Natalia. However, she had the feeling that he had opened her soul and, like a book, she read everything that was written within it. Such was the power of the Jerusalemites' blessing. Before they left, the starets asked them, "Are you from this city?" "No," they replied. "Do you live in the same house as Antonia?" "No," they replied. "So, I tell you, you will stay in this city in the same house with Antonia, and she will be your mother." "No," they answered again. "Antonia is simply an acquaintance of ours." "No," replies Elder Theodosius, "it will be your mother." The interpretation given by an elder to the words of the Elder Theodosius was that all this will happen as she told you. Antonia will be like your mother, since with her help you found the right faith. "I will respect her as my mother," said Ivan, "but for me to come and stay in this city is out of the question." The elder explained to him that he should not show aversion to Minvoti. To this city, and at the command of the Virgin Mary, the starets came, after 50 years of serving in Jerusalem near the tomb of Christ, bringing with them holy objects of great spiritual value. This city was the New Jerusalem. After a few years, life in Jungpa began to become difficult. Then Ivan's family left there and came to Minvoti, where they bought a house and took with them Antonia and her daughter, who were homeless. They all lived with love as a family and had Antonia as a mother. Thus, this prophecy was fulfilled. Elder Theodosius constantly wrote them letters and addressed them as follows. "My dear children, Ivan, Natalia, and Rhea, is everything okay?" If something had happened, the name of the culprit was written last in the list, and in this way he challenged him to make amends. After some time, Ivan asked Elder Theodosius to ordain his entire family as monks, as he had done with other families. But the elder told him that the time had not yet come. He knew what each of the family wanted. The elder died after a short time, and all his spiritual children felt orphaned until they found their new spiritual father, the confessor Anthony Chernov, with the monastic name Epiphanius. Even John and Natalia lived to a ripe old age. John died in 1992, fully prepared, having withstood the temptations and grown spiritually strong. Natalia still lives with her son, and they are members of the Church of the Catacombs of Russia. Story of Antonia. Antonia was, as is well known, the spiritual child of the starets, and often visited him until the war. Once, when she wanted to go to Elder Theodosius and had no money for tickets, she went to the station and sat there for 3 days, hoping that some way would be found for her to leave. Just before she despaired, she prayed to Elder Theodosius to help her. Suddenly, she saw a young man in front of her who offered her his tickets, since he would not be traveling. Antonia tried to find and give him at least some money, but raising her eyes, she realized that the young man was no longer there, only the tickets. When Elder Theodosius arrived, he said to her with a smile, "You have come by miracle, Antonia. I heard my little child calling me to help, and that is why God sent his angel and helped you." Antonia was 24 years old when she met the starets. She was married in a civil marriage and had a young daughter. Her husband was imprisoned, and she regretted not having had a religious marriage. Elder Theodosius, out of her deep repentance, recognized her as his spiritual child and asked her when she would like to face the difficulties of life in her youth or in her old age. Antonia preferred the former, that is, in her youth. After she had repented and after receiving communion, Elder Theodosius told her, "From today on, you are like a baby without sins. However, when you go through your worldly life and fall because of sin, do not despair. You can get up, asking for God's help with the prayer, 'Lord, have mercy,' and he will surely have mercy on you." "Can someone live without sinning?" Antonia asked. "It depends on the sins," the starets replied, "because there are various ones. the small and well-known ones, such as being bitter or judging someone. At night, by making 12 penances and reading the Our Father, the Creed, and the Theotokos Virgin, they are forgiven. However, there are also grave sins, mortal sins such as murder, theft, adultery, fornication, and others. For these, you must go to the priest to confess, pray, and with great effort you can be absolved. "What will my sin be?" Antonia asked him. "Debauchery," Elder Theodosius replied. Antonia became very angry and told him, "I have never been like this, and I will never be." Instead of kneeling and begging for help, having wrong confidence only in herself, she blocked it. In the course of her life she fell into this sin since she had no husband. Before this happened, Elder Theodosius called her "my golden child." After her sin, he sent her a letter that read, "Fool, do you know who she is?" Antonia understood that Elder Theodosius knew what she had done, and with a broken heart she answered him, "I've only had misfortunes. I was fired from my job, my house was destroyed by bombing, and by a miracle I'm alive." "That's not even misfortune, only the fire of hell is misfortune," he replied. Then he realized that the time had come to repent. Antonia did not dare to visit him during the war, and only when it was over did she go to meet him at the hermitage. Everything was the same, only she felt different from what it had been 5 years before when she had last been there. Antonia fell at his feet and with tears confessed her sins. "I forgive you, and you are forgiven," he told her. She left the confession feeling relieved, but she wondered if God had forgiven her. She confided this thought to an acquaintance of hers. "I don't think the elder told me the truth. He simply told me that God had forgiven me to comfort me." The next day, when she visited him again, the elder seemed to be avoiding her. "What is your name?" he asked her. "I am Antonia. Don't you recognize me? I don't know you, and I don't understand what you're saying to me since you don't believe that God has forgiven you. So let it be as you say, that is, that he did not forgive you." As soon as he said this to her, he went away. She was left bone dry from grief, as if God himself had abandoned her. All night she cried and cried. "My God, forgive me, because if you forgive me, the same will be done by Elder Theodosius, whom I had not believed when he had first told me." It seemed to her that she was really talking to God himself. When she went back to Elder Theodosius, she was smiling. "You have learned your lesson," he told her. "So leave your sins and with my blessing, move to me." Antonia asked him, "Should I go to church in my city, now that a church has opened there?" "No, I do not give you my blessing. Come here." She obviously meant that the state church was in apostasy. Antonia eventually moved to live with him in Minvoti. Antonia's mother, Paraskevi, once visited Elder Theodosius and he, foreseeing her death, told her, "There are different deaths. Some are burned in fire, others drown in water, and others are torn apart by beasts. Do 300 penances every day, and the merciful God may grant you another death." When Paraskevi finished her rule, Elder Theodosius invited her to visit him and give her a new name. This meant a different life and a different death. However, Antonia's mother did not go. She delayed, postponing until tomorrow. Then, it was 1947, the time of great hunger and misery, and together with other women they went to the forest to gather chestnuts. There, she caught a cold and fell ill. The other women went up the mountain and left Paraskevi alone, since she could not follow them. On the way back, they did not find her, nor did they look for her, since they did not want to be late. Within a few days, strangers found her dead in the forest. This meant that because she did not obey, her death was no different. Antonia saved many memories as testimonies about Elder Theodosius, since she lived until 1996. Testimony of a young woman. A very young neighbor of the Starets became seriously ill. Then he called Elder Theodosius to see her. As soon as he saw her, he said to her, "Now is the right time for you to die." She reacted by crying and saying, "I want to live. I don't want to die. I am still so young." For a long time he tried to convince her, but she did not agree. So he blessed her, and she was healed. However, her life was filled with many difficulties. All her relatives were lost, and she lived alone and poor. Whenever Elder Theodosius passed by her house and saw how she was living, he would speak to her and say, "Did you want to live? Live now." Witness of Nicholas. Nicholas knew Elder Theodosius and was his spiritual child. Like many other Christians, he was imprisoned and tortured for many years. At one point, from the great suffering, he became tired and was looking for a way to escape the torture of prison. So, through diabolical intervention, he found suicide as a solution. One day, while going somewhere under guard, he believed that it was the right time to escape, to force the guards to shoot him. However, turning around, He saw Elder Theodosius walking near him and smilingly telling him, "Be patient." Thus, he abandoned the thought of suicide. However, the devil did not leave him alone and put another thought in him to damn him. That is, to act as a prophet and predict the death of his fellow prisoners. Nicholas became nervous. He remained sleepless and had the feeling that horns had grown on his head and a great weight was pressing down on his soul. He could not stand it and cried out, "Starets, help me!" Immediately, the elder Theodosius appeared, and with 2 simple movements of his hand, he uprooted the horns, and from then on he stopped the prophecies of temptation. A short time later, he was released from prison and managed to see Starets, colonel and monk. Elder Theodosius secretly performed many ordinations of monks whose outward appearance remained the same. The most remarkable of all the ordinations was that of Grigory Goncharenko. Ecclesiastical history has many similar examples, where kings, nobles, soldiers, and others are recorded, who left glory, wealth, and majesty to become simple servants of God for the salvation of their souls. These details about Gregory's ordination were given by his wife, who is still alive, as real testimonies for those who are interested in learning. During the war, Gregory was a colonel. His wife also served in the military service. When the war ended, they were sent to a military hospital in Georgia for therapeutic support for Gregory from the hardships of the war. There, they encountered many functioning churches, in contrast to those in Russia, which were all destroyed. His wife then went to church out of curiosity. At that moment, a wedding was taking place. The woman liked the image she saw so much that she was saddened because she had not had a religious wedding, because it was forbidden due to her husband's high state position. Influenced as she was, the woman immediately felt the need to embrace church life. So she began to go regularly to that church. There was an orphan named Michael. Once he said to her, "Come, let me take you to my mother." The woman knew that by mother he meant the visionary elder Eugenia, who lived in a den. When they went to see her once, she brought out an icon of the Virgin Mary, sat in front of it and began to prophesy. "Your path," he told her, "leads to the North Caucasus, where a very rich groom awaits you, who, while many brides follow him, will love you the most." Then she began to think that perhaps she could divorce her husband and find another. The woman, returning to the military hospital, found her husband and said to him, "Since we haven't had a religious wedding, I've decided that, until we do, we'll live like brothers." The colonel, who was a man with a rare soul, accepted it, saying to her, "As you wish." The woman then recounts, "When we left the military hospital, they sent us to Stavropol. Arriving there, we went to the military commander of the area to tell us where to go. So he ordered us to go wherever we wanted and to find a vacant position in one of the cities of the prefecture. We took our child, a few things, got into our car and set off. On the way, the car broke down. It was getting dark and we found ourselves on 3 unfamiliar roads and didn't know what to do. So we prayed that God would help us get where we needed to go. Suddenly, a truck headed to Minvodi stopped next to us. It took us with it, and we arrived at what was definitely our destiny. In this city, the position of military commander was vacant. Gregorios took it and became the military commander in Minvodi. Gregory's wife was looking for the opportunity to perform the wedding. However, no priest dared to perform a religious wedding to the high-ranking state official. However, the woman did not stop searching. After much effort, she was informed about a secret priest who worked secretly and whose neighbors knew him only as his grandfather, Starets Theodosius. They told her where and how to go to find him without asking anyone else. When she arrived at the Starets' house, she looked around without knowing who to ask. Suddenly, Natalia, nun Seraphimia, came out and asked the woman who she was looking for. "I don't know how to ask," she replied. She understood and let the woman into the house. Thus, by the mercy of God, she found the Jerusalemite. When she entered the room, the elder sat on the bed. She immediately recognized him, remembering the dreams she had seen recently, namely, entering cells decorated with garlands, with a shrine, and nearby she saw an old man dressed in white. The woman understood that this was the groom she had been told about. "Sit by me," he said. "I am ashamed. How can I approach your holiness?" The Starets put the towel called Adam around his neck and began the confession from the beginning of her life. More correctly, he himself told her sins, and she wondered how she knew everything. He also told her the next time to bring her daughter Zoe to be baptized. From then on, every Sunday, they went to the Starets' secret church for confession and Holy Communion. He never saw how it functioned, since this was done secretly at night. The woman felt herself shining with joy as she wept for her sins. She talked with her husband about the mysterious Starets, and he began to long to meet this true Christian as soon as possible. She simply wanted and prayed that when this meeting took place, no one would be there to see him. When they went to meet him, night had covered everything. The gate was open. The house was prepared for guests, but no one was to be seen anywhere, just as the colonel had wished. At one point, the starets entered, looked at the night visitors, and said to them with a smile, "Gregory is good." First, he sorted them out spiritually and then ordained them monks. Colonel Gregory became a monk with the name Michael, and his wife and daughter also took a new name. When the name the starets gave during ordination began with the first letter of the secular name, life would not change much, he said, in contrast to the case where the first letter changed. When the starets gave Gregory the name Michael, he handed him over for protection to the archangel Michael, who had saved him from an unjust death in his youth. The family, because they did not have a house to live their solitary life, decided to build 2 cells that would protect them from dangerous foreign eyes. Michael took German prisoners as carpenters, who accepted them with pleasure. The woman, because she knew that they were hungry, treated them to lots of delicious food. They were supposedly taken to work on Sundays as well. However, not violate the religious regulations of the holiday, but to rest and have a nice meal. Many saw the Germans as enemies and wanted to exterminate them. However, Michael, different from the others with his sweet Christian behavior and the love he received from them, began to become a target, and many remarks were made to him. When the Germans finished the small house with 2 cells and moved the few things, they laughed that even the military leader of the region had such a small and poor house. The starets consecrated this house, and until his last years, Michael's wife lived in it. The couple lived happily and spiritually. However, the secret monastic life began to conflict with social obligations. Michael's initially good character became sweeter and gentler, and his colleagues disagreed with this. His wife often went to St. Theodosius crying and asked him how her husband could save his soul with this work he did. "Do not cry, mother," he told her with love as usual. "Every soul has its own guardian angel." Archangel Michael quickly prepared for the monk Michael the crown of his martyrdom. One day, when he was returning to Minvoti from another city, a terrible car accident put an end to his life. His wife's grief was very great. Starets Theodosius grabbed her by the shoulders, shook her, and said to her, "It was God's will, God's will." When they arrived at the scene of the accident, they found nothing of his body, but his soul, like a bird, had flown to God. Colonel Gregory's funeral was held with military honors, something his nun wife did not want, however. The coffin remained closed, since there was nothing left to put inside. The starets performed the funeral ceremony for the monk Michael at his home, for the repose of his soul. God took him to himself, saving him from the suffering of the new harsh measures of oppression that were coming for the military. The archangel guarded him from the danger of spiritual death. God took the monk Michael shortly after his ordination, fully prepared for the conquest of eternity. His wife always remained faithful to the starets and became his spiritual child. Shortly before the death of the starets. One day, when Antonia visited Elder Theodosius, he said to her, "I beg God to take me to himself. How much longer will I live? But God told me that I will live a little longer, since I have many children who I love and who need me. So he will leave me a little longer." Afterwards, whoever visited him would say, "How did you find me alive?" After a while, he fell ill and remained in bed for a few days, as he had predicted. 3 days before his end, he had said that the light would go out. Many interpreted this as the end of the world coming, but Elder Theodosius meant his death. For 5 days and nights, his subordinates did not leave him alone at all. They did not want to sleep and did not even feel tired. After 5 nights, Elder Theodosius sent Maria to rest. "Go," he told her, "and if anyone bothers you, come to me, wherever I am, and I will help you. Pray unceasingly, saying, 'Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me, and make your cross properly.'" In addition, there was a pun between them about the starets' age. "How old do you think I am?" he would ask her, and she would always answer that she did not know, only God knows. The starets would continually answer and say, "As God is my witness, I am telling you the truth." And each time he wanted to say how many years it was, the years would be different. The first time he said 1,000 years, the second time 600 years, the third time 400 years, and no one to this day has been able to interpret what he meant. Continuing, he said to her, "I was dead, but I asked God for a little more time to bless my spiritual children, and God gave it to me." Maria thought that she would live at least 3 more years. Theodosius, reading her thought, said, "No, not that many." Then she asked him, "To whom will you leave us?" And he told her, "Angels of God will protect you." On the 6th day, Theodosius got out of bed, went out into the street, gathered the children and began to run with them, as he was accustomed to do because he always loved them. Those who saw him were amazed and said, "How, while he was so sick, did he get up and start running?" On the seventh day he lay down and did not get up again. He gathered them all around him and blessed them. Only when Ludmila came did he turn his head away, because he had foreseen that she would depart from orthodoxy, but with his hand he blessed her. When she left, the starets said sadly, "I built my house with so much effort only for it to fall apart so quickly." He meant that few would remain in the true faith, since many would be led astray. And so it happened. When he was sick, all his subordinates would discuss among themselves and say, "Who will bury him when he dies?" Since they knew that there was no other Orthodox priest. However, they hesitated to ask him. They decided to send Maria to ask him. She had difficulty telling him what she wanted, but she only looked at him. Elder Theodosius understood her thought and said to her, "God will take care of it and send the right person." He blessed them all again, except for Pelagia, who was outside. However, when the door opened for her to enter, she could not take a single step. She remained motionless, pale. Then Liuba pushed her away with force, and she knelt before him, crying. Elder Theodosius opened his eyes, blessed her, and gave his spirit into the hands of God on August 8th, July 26th according to the new calendar, of the year 1948. Liuba, a little later, justified the reason for her delay in approaching the starets. "I saw the Savior Christ standing over his bed and holding his soul. This vision captivated me." Immediately, joyful bell sounds were heard coming from the iconostasis, the starets' funeral. The testimony of a neighbor reveals to us how God acted for the starets' departure party. She had met a traveler, barefoot, exhausted, wearing a hat and a cap. Because she loved travelers, she invited him to her house to host him. As soon as they went to the house, another neighbor came and said to them, "Elder Theodosius has just finished." Immediately the traveler got up, made the sign of the cross, and said, "Let's go quickly." As soon as they entered the house of Elder Theodosius, he said, "Bless," and began the service to the astonishment of everyone, since he knew everything from the inside. He chanted for many hours. When the ritual was over, he said to the blessed Elder Theodosius, "Just as the Savior went to prepare places for his disciples, so you too should prepare places for your children, who may be few now, but later they will become many." When everything was over, he told them, "Now I have to go to Georgievsk because they are waiting for me." Uliani, the woman who brought him, went with him to see him off. When they arrived at the station, she went to get his tickets. When she returned, she did not find him at the kiosk where she had left him. She then asked a saleswoman at a nearby kiosk, "Did you know where grandfather went, who was with me a little while ago?" "I didn't see anyone, you were alone," she replied, and other people from the station whom she asked told her the same thing. "You came alone and were chatting." Since she did not find him, she returned to her house. Before Theodosius's body was taken to the cemetery, his spiritual children asked for a photographer to take his last photo. The photographer came, but he had difficulty at first, since a bright light was coming from his coffin and blinding him. "Who is this?" he asked, with such blinding light around him. "The priest, the Jerusalemite," they replied. "He would be great, because I have never seen anything like it before." Of those who would accompany him to the cemetery, most were women, and because the cemetery was far away, they were concerned with how they would manage to transport him there. As soon as they left their suburb, however, they saw 4 handsome young men approaching them, with long brown hair, beautifully dressed in white shirts, black trousers, and boots. Their clothing was in great contrast to the difficult times of poverty and misery that other people were living through. Those who returned from their work and saw the procession were amazed by the light they saw coming from the coffin of Elder Theodosius. The 4 young men lifted the coffin and carried it to the cemetery. They themselves placed it in the grave and covered it with earth. When the burial was over, they all returned home together for the funeral. They wanted to take the 4 young men who had helped them with them. However, they were not among them, and no one understood when they disappeared. When everyone left the cemetery, only Nicolaus, his spiritual child, remained there. Nicholas suddenly saw light coming out of the tomb and could not stand. He was blinded by its brilliance, fell on the iron cross, and was injured in the face. He came to. Everything around him was calm as before. 4 days after his funeral, a neighbor of Elder Theodosius, a non-Christian, saw Elder Theodosius sitting in his yard with another priest. He looked at her and invited her to come closer to him to bless her. Then he pointed to the other priest and said to her, "This is my brother, Seraphim of Sarov." In the morning, the woman went to the subordinates and asked, "Who was your grandfather?" "I saw him in my dream with his other brother, who was called Seraphim of Sarov." They explained to her as best they could. In a short time, another neighbor was preparing to wash clothes for the next day. That same night, Elder Theodosius came to her in her sleep and forbade her to wash clothes tomorrow because his brother was celebrating. When he went to his subordinates in the morning, he learned that that day was the feast of Seraphim of Sarov. Tatiana's testimony. While Elder Theodosius was still alive, Tatiana's friends invited her to go with them to meet him and guide her. Tatiana ironically told them, "Come on, wait a minute. What will an ascetic say? All priests are the same." And she did not go. However, years later, and after his death, she had a dream that shocked her. In her sleep, she saw Elder Theodosius with Anna, asking her if she was the one who had said that all priests were the same. When Anna answered him yes, he turned and said to her, "Tatiani, repent, repent." Tatiana, the morning she woke up, remembered his words and immediately went to the tomb of St. Theodosius to ask for forgiveness, along with two of her friends Anna and Maria. As they approached the tomb, they heard psalms as if a liturgy were being held. However, when they reached the tomb, they found only one woman in the adjacent tomb, which was her husband's. When they asked her, she told them that no one was there, and that she had not heard anything. However, she described to them a strange dream that she had had the previous night, and that made her come that day to her husband's grave. She saw that while she was coming to her husband's grave, there were many priests dressed in white at the grave of Elder Theodosius, and around them a lot of people, lay people and monks, and among them her husband, and that the liturgy was being celebrated. "We have a liturgy every day," my husband told me. While they were talking, they were clearing the grave of snow. Soon, 3 more women arrived, and then 3 more, Agathia, Theodosia, and Antonia. They all knelt down and began to recite the Akathist hymn in honor of the Virgin Mary. Tatiana's feet froze, but she moved slightly to make room for the new ones, who she thought were coming, without turning her head to see exactly what was happening. The chanting that the first women had begun was supplemented by new voices. When they reached the 13th kontakion, the chanting became very melodious. Then they all turned their heads to see who was singing so beautifully. However, they saw no one. Then Tatiana realized the mistake she had made and became convinced from what she had seen and experienced that not all priests are the same, and that Elder Theodosius was special. Testimony of Antonia. Antonia, also an acquaintance of Theodosius, could not understand what they were going to do at the grave of the starets, since he was now dead. One day, however, she decided to go with the other women to the grave of the Elder Theodosius. When they approached, Antonia stopped abruptly, turned pale, and began to cry. Her friends did not understand what had happened and asked her. She explained to them she had seen Elder Theodosius come out of the tomb to meet her with the cross in his hand and bless them all. Then she understood that Elder Theodosius was not a simple dead man, but a saint according to God. Workers' testimony. One holy Saturday, the women came to the grave of Elder Theodosius to do what was necessary for rest. A tractor worker who had been working the previous night in a nearby field also came, and when he passed outside the cemetery, the tractor stopped. Looking to see what was happening, he saw light coming from inside the cemetery. He thought that perhaps his colleagues, who were also working, would go to rest and lit a fire. So I went to find them, but when I got closer, I saw on this grave a large candle lit with a strong flame, which was not even moved by the strong wind that was blowing. I called out to my colleagues but got no answer. Terrified, I ran to get to my village. Just before I arrived, I stopped to rest a bit, and looking back, I saw the light from the flame still burning. The morning I came to pick up the tractor, I was waiting for my other colleagues, who had also worked with me the previous night near the cemetery, to come so that I could tell them what I had seen. After they listened to me, they also told me their own incident, which was similar to mine. They saw a pillar of light coming out of the very grave of Elder Theodosius and many lit candles around it. However, when they got closer, everything disappeared. These are truly magnificent things that happen. Theodosia's treatment, the servant of God. Theodosia lived in Pyatigorsk, near Minvodi. One day, she injured her leg in an accident and suffered for a long time. She was forced to go to the doctors, and after examining her, they found that fluid had accumulated in the wound. They immediately cleaned the wound, but it soon started to fester again. Then they diagnosed that an infection had begun, and that it was necessary to amputate it so that she would not die of sepsis. Theodosia began to cry at the thought that she would remain an invalid. Leaving the doctors, she went to a friend of hers who lived in Minvodi. On the way, she met pilgrims who were going to the grave of Elder Theodosius. They invited Theodosia to go with them, and she and her friend followed them. When they went to the grave, they began to do the necessary things. They cleared it of snow, placed bread and water on the grave, lit candles, and began to read the Akathist hymn with tears. Theodosia, in tears, also asked for help from the elder Theodosius. Then she took bread and water from the grave and returned to the house of her friend Anastasia. Anastasia's husband, angry, said to them, "Instead of being in the hospital because Theodosia's condition is so serious and dangerous, are you returning to the cemeteries?" However, Theodosia told him that she had left all her hopes for healing in the hands of God and in the help of elder Theodosius. So she soaked a cloth with water that she had brought from Theodosius's tomb, wrapped it around her leg, and lay down. She immediately fell asleep, something she had not been able to do since her accident, due to the severe pain she was in. In the morning, when she woke up and unwrapped her leg, she saw that it was swollen, without redness, completely clean and without pain. She told Anastasia and her husband about it, and together they glorified God and elder Theodosius. When this happened, it was Christmas. The next day, Theodosia got the referral for surgery and went to the hospital. When she arrived at the doctor's office, there were two doctors there. One was experienced and the other a trainee. The experienced doctor, when he took the referral and read it, began to shout at Theodosia. "With such a diagnosis, you were 2 days late in coming? Now they will cut off your leg from the root." He approached her and began to examine her. He was surprised to find that her leg was healthy, contrary to the referral that said it was sepsis. He did not understand what had happened. Theodosia explained to them how the compresses she made with the blessing from the grave of elder Theodosius cured her. The trainee doctor began to laugh. "She's a village girl, she tells fairy tales." But the experienced doctor looked at him sternly and said, "You are still too immature to understand that her faith saved her." Theodosia lives to this day and keeps the referral as a document of great value to the glory of God and elder Theodosius for the healing of his servant. Treatment of Raisa and her husband. This couple lived with their son in the village of Krimskaya. The woman worked as a laborer and her husband as a driver. One day, when the father had taken his child to work, the child was accidentally buried under a pile of earth during earthworks, and when they found him, he was dead. Their pain was so great that in a short time his mother, Raisa, fell ill. The doctors diagnosed a cyst that was constantly growing and they rushed her to surgery to prevent the ugly development. However, Raisa, because she was afraid of surgery, delayed making the right decision. One night she saw a dream in her sleep. A grandfather wearing a white shirt and gray socks. She thought, "What a strange grandfather." The grandfather looked at her and answered her as follows, "You are sick and need to have an operation. That is why you are so sad. But you must come to Minvodi, to my grave, to take from there earth and water that I will bless. And every day you will eat a spoonful of earth, drink water, and you will be healed." Raisa asked him, "Grandfather, where can I find you?" "Our people live there." He asked her again, but got the same answer. He woke up immediately and tried to explain the dream he had seen. "I have no one in Minvodi, and I have never been there. As for the many, I do not know which of them will help me." One day, when she passed by the house of her friend Alexandra, who was the niece of a subordinate of elder Theodosius, and told her about her dream, she understood who the grandfather was. However, to be sure, he brought her and showed her various icons of saints to tell her if the one she saw in her dream was one of them. She did not recognize the grandfather in any of the icons she saw. Then Alexandra brought and showed her the portrait of elder Theodosius, who was dressed in holy vestments. Raisa, after first looking at the portrait, said to her, "His face is very similar to the one I saw in my dream, but he was dressed worldly in a white shirt." Alexandra then told her that it was certainly elder Theodosius, who helps and heals all the sick. He told her many of his miracles and urged her to go to Minvodi, where she would find her aunts, who were subordinates of elder Theodosius, and one of whom still lived there in elder Theodosius's house, to guide her and lead her to his grave. Raisa decided to go. She told her husband that she would visit a good doctor who had been recommended to her in Minvodi. Her husband did not object, and Raisa set off for Minvodi. When she arrived in Minvodi, she met Anna, his subordinate, and asked to see the photograph of the starets in folk costume. Raisa immediately recognized him as the one she had seen in her dream. After such a long journey, Raisa was waiting to be allowed to rest. Instead, however, Anna took out of the closet and gave her a pair of gray socks so that she wouldn't catch a cold from the morning chill, and they immediately set off for the grave of elder Theodosius. Raisa had not had a strong faith until that moment. She lived a normal life and didn't believe that miracles happened. But from the moment she took the stockings in her hands, something stirred in her soul, and the hope that she would finally be helped flared up. When they reached the grave, Raisa, from the depths of her heart, begged the starets to help her. Listening to the CAUCASUS hymn, she felt her soul filled with faith. When they were finished, she took the earth and water, and when she returned home she began to do what St. Theodosius had advised her in her sleep. In a few days she felt relieved. Soon the cyst disappeared, and she felt completely healthy. After a while, she met the doctor who had diagnosed her illness and had referred her for surgery. He asked her if she had had surgery, and Raisa replied, "I don't need surgery because God has healed me." The doctor got angry and told her, "Don't talk nonsense. Come tomorrow so I can examine you." The next day, she went. The doctor examined her and was shocked to find that none of her old cyst was there. She asked with interest how this had happened. After her treatment, Raisa continued her life normally. Later, her husband also fell ill with a serious throat problem. As time passed, instead of being cured with the pharmaceutical treatment he was receiving, his condition worsened. It got to the point where he couldn't swallow his food, even in liquid form. He couldn't sleep at night, he had difficulty breathing, and it was finally discovered that he had a malignant tumor in his throat. Then Raisa urged him to visit her own doctor in Minvoti, who had his own way of healing, just as he had done for her. Peter, her husband, agreed, thinking that she was talking to him about some great doctor. When he came to Minvoti and saw 3 old women, he asked her, "Will these old women cure me?" "Didn't you see the result in me?" Raisa told him. "That's how you will get well too." This unbelieving man, who until a little while ago no one would have dared to speak to him about faith, now at least he could and did listen to the story of the healing of his wife, Raisa. After that, he agreed to go to the grave of Elder Theodosius. Nina and Maria accompanied them there. They began to read the Akathist hymn, but before they began, they also told Peter to say any prayer he knew. If you ask for his help with faith, you will receive it. Peter said with faith what he knew. When they finished, they took earth, water, and oil from the lamp and returned to Anna's house in Minvoti. Anna began his treatment. She gave him earth to eat, water to drink, and oil to anoint his throat. He did all this because he was ashamed to refuse, but not because he believed he could be cured. He continued to suffer from respiratory distress that did not allow him to sleep. But that night, after the religious care, he slept until morning, and when he woke up he felt happy and hope nested in his heart. The next day he went again to the grave of Elder Theodosius, this time of his own free will and with fervent faith. When he was returning from the cemetery, he saw a hut on the road. Peter was so relieved that he said, "I am coming to live comfortably in this hut, where I feel so beautifully breathing." When Peter returned to his village, he continued the well-known healing treatment with earth, water, and oil, and every day he felt better until he felt completely freed from his illness. Along with the healing came strong faith, since the miracle happened to him. They sold their house in Krimska and moved to Minvoti. There, they found the joy of life and peace of mind. Maria's rescue from drowning. A woman named Maria lived with her 3 children and her elderly parents after her husband had abandoned her. Once, while she was swimming in the lake, she began to sink, and it was impossible for her to save herself. She began to cry out desperately and ask God for help. "Help me, my God," she said, "so that my 3 children do not become orphans." Suddenly, she saw light, and in it the grandfather in the white shirt and a young man with a box in his hand. The grandfather approached her and said, "Maria, we have come to save you from drowning, since your 3 children and your elderly parents only have you to look after." They lifted her in their arms above the water and carried her to the shore. A large crowd gathered, and they began to give her artificial respiration. However, because she had swallowed a lot of water, she did not react at all and remained unconscious. When she came to her senses after an hour, they asked her how she was able to get out, since she was unconscious. She explained to them exactly what she remembered. The believers accepted her words, while the unbelievers mocked them. Maria thanked God warmly for her salvation and began to search for icons in case she recognized those she saw. She immediately recognized the young man with the box in his hands. It was Saint Pantaleimon the healer, but she could not locate the grandfather anywhere. One day, after many years, Maria was talking to Raisa, who had recently moved to Minvoti, and she was telling her about her salvation from drowning. Then Raisa, remembering her healing, immediately understood who the grandfather she had seen was, and led her to the subordinates of St. Theodosius to be sure. When they showed her the portrait of grandfather, she recognized him immediately. She knew well that her saviors were Saints Pantaleimon the healer and Theodosius the wonder worker. A story about a family from their daughter Sophia. My parents were George and Melania. My father was a railway builder in the Black Sea region. There was no permanent residence because we were constantly moving from village to village depending on our work. Once, when we were in a small village, I saw the inhabitants practicing magic. My father showed interest in whether he could become rich in this way. From theory, he quickly moved on to practice. One day, when my mother's younger sister, who lived a virginal life, came to the house, my father put her on a chair, covered her with a black cloth, and painted one of her nails black. He told her to look at him constantly, and he began to say his magical wishes. My mother, however, was afraid for her sister, and told her to say the Our Father, while she went into the other room and knelt down and said the same thing. God did not allow the evil to happen. First of all, Anna saw a horseman in shining armor, holding in his hand a pole with a light all around, which, as he approached, the ugly demons scattered. Then everyone saw the horseman in the room. The father was happy because he believed that he was the one who asked to come. However, the mother shouted to him, "This is St. George." And he said to her, "Be quiet, this is another power." Then the horseman stood before them and said, "I am the victorious George," and asked my father, "Why are you, George, destroying your soul? No one could have saved you if your mother, when she was drowning, had not given you to the Virgin Mary to protect you. I came here at the command of the Virgin Mary and ran to stop you from engaging in magic." When the father learned that he was raised by a foreign woman, he cried a lot. However, the saint told him not to cry because now he was an adult. As for my mother, he said to her, "You, Melania, when you read the Our Father, you leave out a letter, and you, Georgios, a word, and you must not know this prayer and not say it correctly. Because Melania and Anna read it 300 times, that is why I was able to come." Then the saint said to my father, "Do you remember, Georgios, one day when you came home from work and were shouting at Melania? Outside, there were 2 residents watching you and laughing, because what they had done had caught on. Then the commotion continued within the family. Behind the steps they had put a box of magic and you went through it. That's why this commotion came. So get up in the morning, take it, and without talking to anyone go and throw it into the river. That way you can return silently." The father did exactly that. For 3 years the heavenly protector came to my parents, teaching and guiding them. The father begged the saint to show him the place where he would find the treasure so that he could become rich and do God-pleasing works: hospitals, orphanages, nursing homes. However, the saint told him that riches are not for the salvation of his soul. After that, the saint did not come. When he came after a while, he said that it was for the last time. My mother thought, "I will say the Our Father many times and it will begin. No matter how many times you say it, you will never see me again." He replied to her thoughts, "I was coming not for your merit, but to prevent the destruction of your souls that had been entrusted to the protection of the Virgin Mary. You, Melania, will have 7 children. You will be called Maria, and soon you will meet Theodosius the Jerusalemite and follow him. Only then will the blessing of God enter your family." With these words, the saint disappeared forever. After a while, they met St. Theodosius as St. George had told them. In 1925, my family moved to Novorossiysk. I was 6 months old at the time. They heard about the Jerusalemite and his hermitage and understood that it was he whom St. George had sent them to meet. They went there with my sister Vera, who was demon-possessed, and St. Theodosius healed her. However, he told my mother never to take away her white dress and white shoes, no matter how much she wanted them. They thanked St. Theodosius and returned home. My mother, however, left Vera with my aunt and quickly came to feed me. Vera, happy that she was well, went with my aunt to the shops and bought her a white dress and white shoes that she liked. So it happened again as before, and the ordeal continued. The Starets had corresponded with the family and, learning of the events, invited them to move to Minvoti. However, my mother could not obey him immediately, because she was sick and suffered from hemorrhages. Once, when the Starets visited her, he said to her, "Get up, Melania, and walk." My mother immediately got up and began to work. Everyone who saw her was amazed and said how, while she was so sick, she could do so much. Little by little, she healed and became completely well. I was 5 years old at the time, and I remember the strange incident that I experienced together with the Starets. I was in the courtyard of my house with the Starets, and we saw a flock of migratory birds crossing the autumn sky. He called them to come down, threw seeds for them to eat, and after they rested, to go to the good. They obeyed, and it happened as the Starets told them. In 1936, my father, Georgios, suffered from heat stroke and needed immediate first aid. At the same time, St. Theodosius arrived, and with a lamp in his hand, he made 3 rounds around the makeshift ambulance and slowly chanted, "Eternity is memory." My brother Nicholas, who heard him, understood that he had predicted his death and was frightened. They took him to the hospital. On the 3rd day, after his admission, St. Theodosius told my mother that her husband had to confess in writing in any language he wanted. My father chose Greek. However, when Saint Theodosius read his writings, he said to my mother, "Go quickly and tell him that he forgot to write something very important." My father tried very hard to remember, and when he remembered, he completed it in a frightened manner. Saint Theodosius admitted this time that everything was written and forgave him. On the fourth day, Saint Theodosius called my elder sister Alexandra and gave her to bring him an antidor and a blessing. Because she had some urgent business, she begged him to bring them to him later. However, the starets ordered her to do it as soon as possible. Alexandra asked him how to give them secretly from the others who were in the room. Saint Theodosius answered her that God will enlighten you to find a way to do it. As soon as Alexandra entered the hospital room, the other 4 patients got up and went outside. She quickly gave the holy gifts to our father. Then she left, but as soon as she arrived at our house, she was informed that our father had fallen asleep. Saint Theodosius also knew the time. After his death, our widowed mother took the monastic form and the name Maria, so that in this way the prophecy of Saint George might be fulfilled. 10 years later, in 1946, our mother also fell asleep. Once I fell ill, and Saint Theodosius told my sister Alexandra that I might die. However, a few days later, when he came back to see me, he told my sister Alexandra that Sophia would not die, but would live a long life. I have lived and remember many miracles that cannot be recorded all. Treatment of a man for eczema. Once upon a time, a man came from Siberia with the intention of finding the tomb of the Jerusalemite. He ended up at the city's hotel. He tried for a long time, but in vain, because he could not find the tomb of Saint Theodosius. One day, he met the women who knew Saint Theodosius and who themselves willingly led him to his grave. The man described to them his suffering until he found him. He had suffered for years from a skin disease of the feet, where pus was constantly flowing from the wounds. The doctors did not agree on the diagnosis. Some said it was eczema, and others that it was leprosy. Not even the pharmaceutical treatment they gave him helped him. The man, because he was suffering a lot, began to ask for God's help. The beginning of the discovery of another healing offered by God began with a pilgrimage to the well-known Saint Job of Russia. His relics were in the monastery in Patsayev, Ukraine. Many pilgrims gathered there, and among them was the sick man from Siberia. At one point, while everyone was waiting for their turn, a subordinate of an old monk came out of the cell and asked if anyone was from Siberia to pass by. He called him by name. The man passed by and went to the elder, who began to ask him about his life and his illness. Then she told him about a dream she had that concerned him. I saw the Virgin Mary, and she told me that a sick man would come from Siberia, and that I should send him to Minvodi, to the tomb of Theodosius of Jerusalem. When he arrives there, he should light the lamp, pray, and anoint his feet with oil. On top, he should pour earth from the tomb, wrap them up, and keep them tied up like this until he reaches his home. The man, hearing this message from the Virgin Mary that concerned him completely, felt stronger spiritually and without delay set out for Minvodi. When he reached the tomb of Saint Theodosius, he did with religious reverence all that the monk had told him to do. For 5 days he made this pilgrimage continuously and asked from the bottom of his heart for the help of Saint Theodosius. Then he set off on his return journey to Siberia. The journey was difficult because of the long distance and his bound feet. When he finally reached his home, he unwrapped his feet and, lo and behold, his wounds were dry and covered with new pink skin like a baby's. It seemed strange to him that there was not even a trace of the much earth he had put on. A miraculous cure in all. A year after his healing, he visited the tomb of Saint Theodosius with his wife, daughter, and mother-in-law, first to thank him and then to ask for help again. His mother-in-law had been suffering from an eye disease for years, and no doctor could help her to recover. They met at the tomb of Saint Theodosius with Raisa, and there the man told her the story of his healing, and together they prayed that Saint Theodosius would perform his miracle again for his mother-in-law. When we finished, we took oil from the lamp and anointed my mother-in-law's eyes. We also put dirt from the grave on top of the oil, he recounted. The daughter of the family, who was also a doctor, became concerned about what she saw them doing and cried out, "Dad, you're going to cause infection to Grandma with what you're doing to her." "Why, my daughter, do you have so little faith in your soul? You saw how with these blessed materials I was also healed. Perhaps with the second miracle in our family, your soul will be filled with faith in God and his Saint Theodosius." A miraculous surgical procedure. A woman from Minvodi, whose name was Nina, fell seriously ill and had to undergo immediate surgery. Fear filled her heart with anguish and her eyes with tears. But most of all, she was saddened that she would leave her sick and elderly mother without protection. She constantly begged God, crying, and asked him not to abandon her. One day, before she was admitted to the hospital, she asked for his help in fervent prayer. Suddenly, she heard someone coming from the other room. She thought her husband had woken up and was coming to scold her for being awake and crying. But in front of her she saw a short, thin grandfather who said to her, "I've come to help you, so you don't have to worry. I'm going to do the surgery you need now, so you can stay home and take care of your mother. I'm going to do a small operation and take the pain away." Nina felt as if some sharp instrument had touched her and opened her without pain. It took out a bag of fluid from inside her liver. Nina then thought, "Well, you opened me. Now, how are you going to sew me up?" The grandfather answered her thoughts. "Don't worry. God will help this to happen too." He took hold of both of his hands and joined the edges of the incision and, caressing this point, closed the wound and said to her, "Go to the Kovalevs," his spiritual children, "and let them give you oil from the lamp to drink and anoint yourself. And that way you will be completely well and never forget God." Nina managed to ask him before he left, "Grandfather, what is your name?" "A Jerusalemite, monk Theodosius," he replied. She begged him not to leave immediately, but to sit with her a little longer. However, he replied that he had to leave immediately because many people were waiting for him. She was shocked by everything, but more so by the fact that a miraculous intervention had saved her from surgery and made her well. Epilepsy treatment. A grandmother and her granddaughter came from Budyanovsk because the little girl suffered from epilepsy, and they pinned their hopes for a cure on the tomb of St. Theodosius. After they went to the tomb, they bowed and prayed, took earth, water, and oil with them, and left. Years later, another pilgrim who knew them came and spread the news that since then the girl was healed and completely freed from the illness and is studying. Treatment of a deformed face. From Yessentuki came a man with a face so disfigured that it caused fear, and many avoided looking at him. When he coughed, the blood vessels in his skin burst and pink fluid poured out. He also went to the tomb of St. Theodosius to ask for help. All those who were there felt so sorry for him that they sat down to pray with him so that the saint would help him to be healed. In a few weeks, Mary and Anna saw the man again at the tomb of St. Theodosius and did not recognize him. His face had completely healed, and the healing was visible. He explained to them that until then no one had been able to help him, despite the fact that he had spent a lot of money and visited many doctors. However, in one of the many waiting lines for a doctor, I met the women who knew St. Theodosius, and they advised me to come to Minvodi, to his tomb, to be healed. So I came here and found my healing. 1,000 glories to God and to the Jerusalemite. Interventions of St. Theodosius. Before his death, Maria Kavaliova, nun Marina, before she fell asleep in January 1983, was working in the field when she saw St. Theodosius approaching her, blessing her and saying, "Read the Gospel." She made him repent, but as soon as she got up, he had disappeared. 3 days later, the nun Marina, a spiritual child of St. Theodosius, fell ill, and one day before her death, she saw him again, and he read her the prayers of the Exodus service. In the same year, in December 1983, at the age of 87, Sister Anna Kovaleva, nun Angeliki, who had been coming to the hermitage of St. Theodosius since she was a 10-year-old girl, passed away. In her final days, she had a problem with her eyes. One day, she heard the door of her house open and someone enter. It was St. Theodosius, who had fallen asleep 35 years ago. The nun crucified him to make sure that it was not an apparition of an evil one, and then he said to her, "Prepare yourself, because in 3 days you will go to God. However, since I remember that you begged me if it were possible not to pass through the customs, I tell you that God has taken care to take you to himself by martyrdom." 3 times St. Theodosius walked around her with a lamp in his hands and recited farewell prayers. On the 3rd day after this incident, the nun met a tragic death from a train accident as she was casually crossing the tracks and did not pay attention. Her arm and leg were severed and were thrown far away. Before giving up her spirit, however, she managed to say, "Lord, forgive me." Daria, the nun who was following her, felt as if a hand was pushing her away in order to be saved, and she considered herself guilty for the fact that she remained alive and her spiritual sister died. The message, however, was that it was God's will that what was about to happen. Encouragement to religious marriage. A student named Rima was studying at a university in a different city from the one where her parents lived and had a classmate named Vladimir, with whom they fell in love and moved on to live together. They had a civil marriage in secret from her parents, who, as religious people, would not allow this marriage to take place. Rima subsequently became pregnant, but was afraid to confess it to her parents, because they did not even know that she was married. One day, Rima saw in her dream that she had entered a room where in front of the shrine was kneeling Saint Theodosius, dressed in white and shining like the sun. Rima crucified him, thinking that perhaps it was an apparition of the evil one. She prayed in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and the starets answered her, Amen. Then he turned to her and said, I have come to tell you, Rima, to have a religious wedding and give birth to your son Nikolaos. He offered her a piece of antidora and reminded her that she had to have a religious wedding as soon as possible, so as not to be considered a prostitute. Rima took the antidoros, ate it, and woke up with it. She told Vladimir everything she saw and heard, who immediately agreed to have a religious wedding, to the joy of Rima's parents. On the eve of St. Nicholas, their son was born and was named Nicholas. Testimony of Eugenios, a young student. My grandmother Maria was very sick. Her back was hunched, so she bent over and walked only with a cane. At home, we read books in honor of St. Theodosius. My grandmother and my uncle Vladimir decided to go to his grave and ask for his help. They took me with them. We didn't know the way to the cemetery, but we followed the others. From one point on the route onwards, we didn't know where to go. At that exact moment of our impasse, I saw an old man with a cane in front of me, and I tried to reach him to ask him. My grandmother and uncle were following me. However, no matter how hard I tried to reach him, I couldn't. However, he seemed to be guiding us, because as soon as we reached the cemetery, he disappeared. The second time we went back to the grave, the bus took us closer to the cemetery, and then the three of us took the road we already knew. Suddenly, I saw the same grandfather, whom I had seen before, approaching me and saying, Hello, Eugenia. I was surprised how he knew my name even though I lived so far away. And while I was thinking about this, my grandmother and uncle had moved far away, and I could only see my grandfather with his white shirt, his white hair, and his cane. The third time I met him, we had come back by bus, and on the way I was following my grandmother and uncle further behind. The same grandfather came to me again, but not as a simple grandfather, but as a beautiful priest who radiated joy and strength and who was not easy to look at. This magnificent priest stretched out his hands that looked like crystal first on my shoulders and then on my head, and I crossed mine to receive his blessing, bowing in respect. My grandmother and uncle had moved away again, while I watched in ecstasy the brightly dressed priest. However, when I got up from my penance, St. Theodosius had moved away from me and had disappeared behind a tree. After that visit to his grave, my grandmother left her cane and walked freely, to her joy that she was healed, and mine that I was worthy to see the miracle worker Theodosius of Jerusalem 3 times. Unexplained phenomena that lead to God. On the night of Pentecost, some women came to read the canon of the feast at the tomb of St. Theodosius. When dawn broke and the sun rose, the figure of the Virgin Mary appeared in this frame of radiance. At the same time, a pillar of light emerged from the tomb, playing with the colors of the sun, and around it, other smaller pillars of light, making the cemetery shine with their light. The duration of these visions was long, and the women who saw all this spread them to others when they returned to their city. The next day, many more pilgrims came to the tomb of St. Theodosius. They also saw the same phenomena at sunrise. Another testimony from a resident of Minvodi who went to visit the grave with her granddaughter was the following. Before they approached the grave, they saw a church rising above it, the dome of which did not resemble that of the Russian church. It was more sloping. The grandmother was frightened and asked her granddaughter if she also saw what she saw. The little girl replied that she saw a church, described it to her, that is, told her how many crosses it had, and they both agreed that they saw the same church. A short time later, the grandmother saw in an album churches from Jerusalem of Byzantine architecture that resembled the church she had seen. And the grandson of the nun Angelica, Oleg, who had asked his mother Larissa to go to the tomb of St. Theodosius, testified, even though he was only 3 years old, that when they went, he too saw a large church in St. Theodosius wearing beautiful golden vestments, entering and exiting it. To whom does he recount the greatness of God? Orders of St. Theodosius for the hospitality of his pilgrims. 3 women among the many pilgrims believed that St. Theodosius could provide solutions to all their problems. So they often visited his tomb and asked for his help from there. Once, when they came in the evening and it was well after dark, and while they were singing the Akathist hymn, they saw an old woman crossing the field across from the cemetery at a brisk pace, holding a pot of hot food in her hands. When this grandmother arrived, she explained to them that as soon as she fell asleep, she saw St. Theodosius approach her bed, nudge her to wake her up, and told her to get up quickly, prepare food, take 3 spoons with her, and take them to his grave, where he has guests who are very hungry. Thus, I have obeyed his orders today, and very often when he asks me, because I live near the cemetery, I cannot deny Theodosius the good hospitality he desires for his beloved pilgrims. The Expeller of Demons. Saint Theodosius, as long as he lived, in addition to his many miraculous interventions, had the power to cast out demons. The testimony of Anna, nun Angelina, describes an incident related to the expulsion of demons as follows. Once a demon-possessed woman was brought to Saint Theodosius, and they asked him with pain of soul to have pity on her and free her. The woman was in a state of amok, and the demon made her thrash, and it was not possible even for the men to hold her upright and calm her. Her relatives, seeing this horrible image of their own face, wept bitterly. Saint Theodosius immediately ordered them to pray silently with, "Lord, Jesus Christ, have mercy on me," so that they would obtain defensive protection and that there would be no fear. Then he took the cross in his hand, lit a candle, and made 3 circles around the demoniac, saying, "God himself commands you to come out of Mary immediately." On the 3rd time, the woman trembled violently, and a lot of smoke came out of her mouth, and then she fell down as if dead. Her people brought her to her house and left her to sleep for several hours. When she woke up, she did not remember anything that had happened, and felt healthy and well, as if she had always been like this. Saint Theodosius advised her never to use bad language in the future, and never to curse, even against an animal, lest God punish her worse. After her healing, this woman visited Saint Theodosius very often to continually thank him for the good he had done for her. Even after his death, Saint Theodosius did not lose his charisma, and from his tomb he freed many from demons with the power he had as a man of God. Even those who were unknowingly bound by demons and discovered it upon reaching his tomb, he immediately freed from their bonds. Miracles of modern times. After a severe case of influenza, Galina de Regina was left with a hematoma on her right hand, reduced vision, and deafness as side effects. The doctors informed her that she would remain like this for the rest of her life. She lived with these problems for 15 years. However, when she began to go as a pilgrim to the relics of Saint Theodosius, she realized that she could hear well, and that her vision was getting stronger, and she could read without glasses. Since then, she has never stopped thanking Saint Theodosius and praising God. Natalia Rodina from Minvodi had been suffering for years from a lipoma on her hand, and it was not certain that she could be cured, since even her doctor could not guarantee her anything. So her hope turned to Saint Theodosius, and as a pilgrim she went to his relics, begging for his help. She took some oil from there and anointed her hand with it. In a week, she was healed. After that, in 1994, her son Alexander suffered from stuttering and was very sad. Her mother-in-law went to venerate the relics of Saint Theodosius and ask for his mercy. He did not refuse to give it, and in a few days, the boy was healed. Victor Kleinhoff suffered from disc disease, and despite the many medications he took, he saw no cure. In 1996, he went as a pilgrim to the relics of Saint Theodosius, and with faith asked for healing. He took oil from his lamp and anointed his waist with it. In 7 days, he was completely freed from his illness. And for him, Saint Theodosius was a healing doctor. Emma Zimlikova Armadire suffered from fibroids for years. Doctors told her that it was incurable and that she would need to undergo a very painful surgery every year. After so many operations, her nose had become a great wound. Not knowing what else to do, she thought of Saint Theodosius and, as a pilgrim, she went to his tomb, praying that he would have pity on her and heal her. She took oil and water from there, and using them, the oil for her nostrils and the water for her face, when she came home she wanted to sneeze. With her sneeze, all the sick mixture came out into the handkerchief. Her healing from that moment was complete. In 1993, Svetlana Theodorova was in the hospital with renal colic. The doctor's official diagnosis was kidney stones. However, because she contracted an infection in the hospital, she returned home to overcome it and then return. During all this time, her daughter read the Akathist hymn in honor of Saint Theodosius. She gave her sick mother some of the consecration she had received from the pilgrimage to drink and stopped her medication. When she returned to the hospital, new tests showed that her kidneys were completely clear of stones. Gennady Karpovich from St. Petersburg suffered from prostate cancer. He did not have optimistic predictions from the doctors about the future. He believed that a pilgrimage to the relics of Saint Theodosius would be his salvation. He did not laugh either. Holy water was his medicine, not the thermal baths. 2 days after returning from the pilgrimage, he went to see the doctor again. This time, the diagnosis was that he was completely healthy, to the doctor's surprise and the patient's delight. Exhumation and transfer of the remains of Jerusalemite. The testimonies of the Christians of the catacombs, which are also considered valid, state that because in recent years the pilgrimage to the tomb of Saint Theodosius had taken on great proportions, and the people's love for the saint was excessive, the Moscow Patriarchate, which had distanced itself from the true faith, decided to stop the free and mass attendance of the faithful and to place it under its control. St. Theodosius, during his lifetime, except once when he was pressured to do so, had not visited the Sergian Patriarchate because he did not recognize it as a genuine representative of the Orthodox faith. On April 11, 1995, they carried out the illegal act of exhuming and transporting the relics of St. Theodosius. Fearing the reaction of the many believers who had gathered, they took extraordinary measures with uniformed guards who surrounded the cemetery. None of the believers present offered to help them with the work of the burial. However, they found the help they needed from drunken men with elastic consciences, and thus their unholy plan began. The people, seeing them, shouted angrily and wept bitterly. The day when all this happened was initially sunny. Then, however, and just as they began to dig, the weather suddenly changed. A strong wind arose, black clouds covered the sky, and a storm broke out. The small hole they had managed to open filled with water, and the mud that was created made their work very difficult. The bad weather was constantly worsening with thunder and lightning that tore the sky and caused fear. Strong signs that St. Theodosius did not want his burial. However, after several hours of great and painful effort, they arrived at his holy relics by digging, and, as if drunk and careless, they broke the saint's skull. The rain was falling non-stop. When they took his holy bones for transport, a little girl named Victoria, who had come on pilgrimage with her mother from Nevinomisk, cried out, "Mom! Mom, look! Grandfather has laid down in his grave again." He passed his message again through the pure heart and gaze of a child, that he does not approve what they are doing to him, and his place is his grave. Finally, they took his relics and transferred them to the church of Krasnuzel. The rain had meanwhile turned into hail, and in this chaos, the roof of the church opened, and the space where his relics would be safely placed filled with water. However, the people who were accustomed to making a pilgrimage to his grave, to taking the healing earth from there, to seeing most of the miracles happening in that place, to seeing demons being expelled from there, continued to remain pilgrims at the grave of St. Theodosius. Unfortunately, however, and despite the messages that the saint sent to his chosen ones to prevent his tomb from being blocked from free access by his pilgrims, the Patriarchate built a chapel so that it could prohibit free entry and allow pilgrimage today with a specific schedule. What a shame. The power of authority fights the beliefs of the pure believers. Delayed offer for Orthodox Greece. On a missionary visit to Russia, His Eminence Metropolitan Kyriakos of Mesogea and Lavriotiki, as a representative of the Holy Synod of the True Orthodox Church of Greece in 1996 to the parishes of the catacombs, received valuable gifts from St. Theodosius of Jerusalem through the following procedure. For almost half a century, a nun and spiritual child of St. Theodosius had guarded, at his behest, the patricially that he wore when he served at the tomb of Christ in Jerusalem, and his holy bread pan, which he also used there. He had bound her to deliver these relics of great value to the Greek Orthodox Metropolitan, who would one day come to Minvoti and celebrate the Trisagion at his tomb. No one knew how this nun had kept such a treasure for so many years, until the moment when, for an unknown reason, she handed it over to a priest of the Church of the Catacombs, shortly before the visit of His Eminence preacher. His Eminence, learning about the unknown to him, priest Confessor Theodosius, wanted to perform the Trisagion at his grave. During the time of his visit there, women who had come earlier to his grave heard joyful sounds as if from bells, and asked in amazement if there was some feast that day, and that was why the bells were ringing. The priest of the nearby church replied to them, "We have no feast, no bells are ringing, and the bell tower is closed." A sign that perhaps surprises, because the mysteries of God often remain inexplicable. These gifts, which were delivered after half a century to the Greek Orthodox Metropolitan, certainly hide a mysterious value, and in the future we hope that the real reason for this great offering will be proven. The explanation given by the catacomb Christians is that Theodosius of Jerusalem revealed to them who their spiritual guide would be, who would strengthen their faith and keep them strong in the trials that the modern era holds in store for the faithful. As for the Greek Orthodox Christians, their explanation is that the saint will take them under his protection as well. These holy relics are kept in the Episcopal Church of the Metropolitan Preacher of St. Catherine in Koropi. They are exhibited for pilgrimage until they find their official and permanent place after the erection of the Church of St. Theodosius of Jerusalem, which the most venerable preacher has made the purpose of his life with the help of the triune God, the saint himself, and our faithful people. Reasons for the saint's bequest to the faithful. If people knew what awaits them after death, they would pray day and night. Unfortunately, many believe that with death comes the end. But life begins after death on earth, and those who patiently endure earthly things work to conquer eternity. Whoever believes in God endures all things. Death should be a constant thought, and you should believe that no matter what you do, God is present. With heavenly faith, we renounce worldly things. True Orthodox Christians should not fear earthly death, but eternal death. If you fear anything more than God, you will surely sin. Our path is a testimony to Christ. If God punishes us, it is for our salvation from eternal torment. Accept the sufferings of life with patience. Salvation comes from the recognition of sin, from repentance of the soul, and from patience in all the sufferings of life. Whatever happens, accept it with humility and love. Take care of the salvation of those close to you who can hear you. Do not turn away from anyone, neither young nor old. Every drop of holy word that is poured into the soul of someone close to you will find a response from God. He who says no more than 7 words a day is saved. Silence protects against many evils. The prayer, "Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner," contains the entire gospel. Wherever you are, whether you are standing or walking or working, always say this prayer that keeps the mind and heart turned towards God. God can ask for you at any moment. Saying the prayer, "Lord Jesus Christ, God, have mercy on me, a sinner," rejoice that the Savior allows you, even though you are unworthy and sinful, to pronounce His name. This prayer burns demons, drives away evil thoughts, puts the fear of God in the heart, and purifies body and soul. This prayer unites people with God and brings salvation. This prayer is more powerful than many others put together. Say it always, and possible without interruption. When you make the sign of the cross, dedicate all your thoughts to God. Love Him with all your heart, and dedicate all your works to His glory. Teach people to make the sign of the cross correctly, and you will receive heavenly honor. What is called destruction in the world is transformed into heavenly salvation. The world, the unbelieving world, will burn in the outer fire without a doubt. So, in the short course of life, be prepared with patience, humility, and love. Whatever happens, everything happens by God's will. With patience, save your soul, and always pray throughout your life, and God will take care of everything. Remember that salvation is found only in the Orthodox faith. Whoever invites me, I will always be near him. Personal characteristics of St. Theodosius. He knew the Gospel by heart. Without the help of a book, he read it for hours without interruption. The lamp and the candle were constantly lit in his room. The starets advised reading the Revelation of John, because from it, one would acquire the fear of God. He walked barefoot his whole life until his final years when, old and sick, he wore boots only for the winter. He never ate any food other than bread, vegetables, boiled potatoes, and cereals. The confessor of true orthodoxy. St. Theodosius, during the difficult years of persecution, served as a confessor of the faith and as an unshakable pillar of orthodoxy. After his release and return from exile, 1927 to 1932, he did not perform his liturgical duties openly as before, but only secretly as the priest of the Church of the Catacombs. The Russian Patriarchate considered it to have distanced itself from the Orthodox faith and therefore never recognized it as the true church. That is, St. Theodosius never recognized and never visited the Soviet Sergianist Church. One time, representatives of the Patriarchate, whom he did not recognize as priests, came to his house and begged him to visit their churches at least once so that he could see for himself how everything functioned as it used to. Elder Theodosius followed them using a sled because it was winter. After many difficulties, they reached the church. Just before entering the temple, he slipped, fell, and was badly hurt. Bleeding as he was, they carried him home. In this way, God revealed to the righteous elder that even those who recognize the Soviet power as the power of God are forbidden to enter the temple. The spiritual children of St. Theodosius remained faithful to him even after his death. They faithfully followed his commandments and prayed in their homes like the ancient catacombs. At the end of 50 years, they met the confessor monk Anthony Epiphany Chernov and accepted him as their guide. The testimonies are preserved in written texts of the Church of the Catacombs of the Russian land. From your humble servant, accept the word of her heart. From childhood, he loved God very much and faithfully followed his path, endured the trials of life with patience, and fought against every form of desecration. He worthily ascended the ladder of the priesthood, and in Jerusalem the schema was honored. He worked there for many years, and rightly he is called a Jerusalemite, but as Theodosius, the miracle worker and prophet. In Minvodi, everyone worships him with faith, and furthermore as an exorcist of demons. In Minvoti, he is once again honored by everyone. Through his prayers, O Christ God, save your Orthodox everywhere, O Lord. And rightly, he is called a Jerusalemite, but as Theodosius, the miracle worker and prophet. In Minvoti, everyone worships him with faith. And furthermore, as an exorcist of demons. In Minvoti, he is once again honored by everyone. Through his prayers, O Christ God, save your Orthodox everywhere, O Lord.